Chapter 1727. When Zhang Yan entered the Kuan residence, he did not walk into the secret cave dwelling. Instead, he looked at the vast sea of clouds beneath his feet and sat down cross-legged. The tiny golden bead was stirring up trouble below because there were too few methods to keep it in check. It could be foreseen that for a long time in the future, there would be nothing they could do to it. Right now, it was still secretly playing tricks, but after testing it a few times and realizing that there was no reaction from all sides, it would definitely become more and more aggressive. Although the tiny golden bead had to rely on its master in order to unleash its power, it clearly wasn't without a plan. It knew its own shortcomings, and by helping the extraterrestrial demons, it was actually finding a way out for itself. If the demons didn't work, then it would turn to this generation. In short, it wasn't afraid that there was nowhere to fall. In the end, it would definitely find a way to contact the extraterrestrial demons. That would make the situation even more complicated. Thus, it was necessary to find a way to restrict it as soon as possible. In the Kuan residence, as long as one wanted it, one could go wherever one wanted to go. Before this, he had also realized that this was related to the will of God. The higher one's Weili was, the better one could see. Compared to the last few times he had been here, his qi and strength were both accomplished. His will of God and qi were greatly improved. If everything went smoothly, then he would be able to find more secret techniques. However, it was also possible that he would not be able to do so. He would only know if he tried. He calmed his mind and began to think. This time was different from the past. Not long after, he vaguely felt something, but he did not know what he was lacking. He could not reach it. After a few failed attempts, he retreated from his meditation and thought about what was wrong. The first reason was that the qi and strength bodies had not merged into one, causing his qi to be impure. However, after thinking about it, he felt that it had nothing to do with this. Whether it was the strength body or the true yang dharma body, they were all him. Now that the main and reverse heaven and earth had been connected, if the pure yin-yang seal hit him now, it would cover him as a whole. There would not be an incomplete scene like before, so there was no such problem. The other reason was that his cultivation was slightly lacking, but it wasn't too far away. Although he could feel it, he couldn't really touch it. He pondered for a while. It was not impossible to improve his cultivation in a short period of time. In the past, because true yang cultivators couldn't find a better cultivation method, they had to exchange pointers with each other and verify each other's knowledge. Only then would they be able to advance. Previously, he had discussed the Tao with Dan Yi and the others several times, so he was temporarily unable to learn from them. However, he couldn't forget that the cultivation method he cultivated wasn't limited to the Qi Tao, but also the Strength Tao. He had to go to the Scarlet Continent to search for the Divine Contract 6th transformation, but he had no clue how to go further. However, he had just entered this realm, and his cultivation was still rising. As long as he continued to cultivate, even if he didn't do it intentionally, his comprehension of Tao arts would gradually deepen. Luckily, he didn't expect to reach a certain level. As long as he could enter that place, it would be fine. Therefore, he expected that it wouldn't take long before he calmed his mind and transferred his consciousness into the body of strength. He then started to absorb the indescribable and started to cultivate. About 100 days later, he felt a movement in his heart and couldn't help but come out of his meditative state. He knew that it was fate, so he tried to sense it and found that the existence had become much clearer. So he didn't hesitate anymore and gathered his spirit. In a split second, the scenery in front of him changed. He raised his head and found that he had arrived at an unscalable big pagoda. He was currently floating in the air. This place was extremely spacious, but the walls were smooth and almost reflective. The bottom was empty, as if there was no bottom. There was only a golden scroll floating above his head. After gazing at it for a moment, he floated over and grabbed the golden slip into his hand. But right at this moment, everything around him suddenly vanished, and he actually returned to where he was before. Only the item in his hand could prove that what he experienced wasn't an illusion. His expression did not change much. With his current cultivation, whether that place just now really existed or was just an illusion, it did not mean much, because he could switch between them. In his opinion, only his whaley body was real just now. He placed the golden scroll on his knees, and with a light wave of his hand, he slowly opened it. However, when the scroll was completely unfurled and his gaze landed on it, he discovered that there was actually nothing inside. This was not referring to the words, but rather the fact that there was no divine will, no aura. It was completely empty, as if nothing existed. His eyes flickered slightly, and he understood that if there was no cultivation method that led to the next level, then there was no need to leave this thing behind. Since he had obtained this thing, then it had already proved something, and it could not be judged from the surface alone. After thinking about it for a long time, he had a thought. Perhaps this place was referring to the formless void. It was just like how there was nothing in the void. Before the chaos was divided, there was nothing in the world. Naturally, there would not be anything in the world. If there was something in the world, then there must be a bit of true yang to be activated, and then all things would evolve. As the saying goes, the Tao begets one, one begets two, two begets three, three begets all things. Among them, one was the most crucial. All things would change based on it, and only by finding it could they evolve. When he thought of this, he first tried to send a strand of origin qi into it and found that there was no movement. This meant that his qi was not one of the Tao begets one. Since that was the case, then the most likely thing left was the cultivation method. Whether it was the human Tao Yuan Zun he had met in the past, or the Khanate demons, they all had their own fundamental cultivation methods. It was just that he had not been a true yang cultivator for long, and he had not yet established his true foundation. Now it seemed that he needed to establish it. For this, he had actually considered it a long time ago. After a cultivator became a true yang cultivator, if they wanted to continue on the path of qi, they could no longer follow the path of their predecessors. They needed to create their own cultivation methods, so many people abandoned their previous cultivation methods and turned to another path. After he entered the Tao, he first cultivated the Tai Golden Book, and then the 5 directions and 5 elements Taishan True Technique. He had relied on this method all the way here. This was something he had deduced himself, and it was completely different from the original cultivation method of the Taishan sect, so there was no need for him to deliberately change it. His eyes flashed, and he said, "Since that is the case, I will create a cultivation method today, and it will be called the Taishan True Technique!" After making up his mind, the layers of Yuan Qi rolled up, and after just a moment of visualization, a 5-colored brilliance was released from the will of the spirit. After a while, it faintly merged into the Xian Qi. After a few more breaths, it turned from virtual to real, and behind it, there were 5 images of Qi rotating nonstop. When the light fell on the golden scroll, there was a change on it, and at the same time, there were 5 colors reflected, but it was only at the beginning, and it had not yet flourished. Zhang Yan activated it a few times, but he could not continue. He understood that he could only cultivate with this foundation, and when his cultivation reached a certain level, it would be possible for him to see the true technique behind it. He thought, if I want to improve my cultivation, this is not something that can be done in a day and night. It seems that I will not be able to walk this path in a short period of time. If I want to restrain the Tai Golden Pearl, I can only think of a way to use my supernatural power. Fortunately, this trip was not without gains, and it was only a matter of time before he established the foundation. The golden scroll was also an ordinary object, and if he wanted to find the true technique in the future, he would probably need it. He got up, and with a thought, he went out of the Kuan residence and returned to Xinyuan Heaven. He sat down on the seat and called out. Not long after, a golden light flew in from outside and landed in front of the hall. Zhang Chan walked out, bowed to the seat, and said respectfully, "Master, what instructions do you have for me?" Zhang Yan said, "I need to refine a Dharma artifact restriction. There are quite a few heavenly materials and earthly treasures in the Kuan-Shi continent that I can use. Today, I order you to go there and collect them for me." Zhang Chan said with a bitter expression, "Master, this lowly one has seen ordinary treasures before, but this lowly one doesn't recognize those in the Kuan-Shi continent." Zhang Yan said with a smile, "You don't have to worry about this." He pointed his finger, and records of various treasures were sent into Zhang Chan's memory. Zhang Chan went through these things in his heart again, and with a stomp of his foot, he said loudly, "I will definitely do this for you, master." Zhang Yan smiled and waved his sleeve again, and a golden light fell into his Dharma body. He said, "There are still a lot of demons on the continent. This is for you to protect yourself." Go. Zhang Chan said happily, "Thank you, master." He bowed again, and then flew out of Xinyuan heaven, turned into a ray of light, and landed in Busu heaven. After he escaped into it, he only felt that he was in a trance at first, and then as if he suddenly woke up, he found that he was already standing on the ground. But when he looked around, he found that it was dark, and he couldn't help but be surprised, thinking that he had gone to the wrong place. He circulated his Fa Li, and golden red light shone out from his eyes, illuminating the surroundings in a flash. Only then did he realize that the top was covered by huge and dense branches and leaves, so not even a bit of light could shine through. He also felt that it was strange. He had never seen a tree that was so tall. It was not an exaggeration to say that it covered the sky. Moreover, he could feel that countless spiritual vigor was being swallowed by the branches and leaves. However, it was rather difficult for a plant to develop spirituality. Moreover, it was extremely easy for it to encounter disasters. Therefore, he was not optimistic about it. After searching through his memory, he found that this was not what he was looking for. He muttered, turned into a golden red splendor, and had already passed through the cover of the leaves. Here, there was no one to compete with him for spiritual opportunity, and he could not help but take a deep breath, and couldn't help but show a satisfied expression. He had been to many worlds, but had never seen a place with spiritual opportunity that could compare to this place. Even the mountain and sea realm could not compare. After inhaling and exhaling a few times, he felt that his entire body was brimming with mana. He smiled in satisfaction and looked around. He saw that on the surface of the ground in the distance, there were deep ravines and shattered mountains. It was a wondrous sight, but he felt that something was wrong. He opened his eyes and his vision suddenly rose. It was as if he was looking down from the clouds. He saw that those ravines were actually claw marks. Wherever the claw landed, it actually broke several mountain ranges in half. He clicked his tongue in wonder upon seeing this, and he knew that this place was far from simple. He had to be careful as well. After observing the situation for a moment longer, his body swayed, and golden and red light flashed as he flew toward a certain direction. Chapter 1728. 30 years later, Kunsher continent. Deling Mountain was a desolate land in the southeast of the continent. There was only a single tree that stood there. Other than the birds that flew across the vast sea that would come here to rest every season, there were very few strange creatures that came here. Thus, it became a gathering place for living tribes. Because they relied on this giant tree to survive, the tribe was named Chi. Most of the people built their nests on the tree. This was to avoid floods and fierce beasts, and also to avoid some man-eating monsters. Most of the people in this tribe migrated from other places to avoid disasters more than 100 years ago. They had been multiplying until now. In the beginning, there were only about 100 people. After so many years, it had become a small settlement with thousands of people. Not far from the tribe, there was a shrine that was as tall as a person. The weeds and withered leaves around it were all cleaned up. There was a statue of a little girl sitting inside, and in front of her were pottery bowls and stone plates. There were various beast heads and organs. Although the smell of blood spread, not only did it not attract any insects or beasts, they all avoided it. As the sun rose, the statue flashed with spiritual light, and a little girl about 8 or 9 years old jumped out of the shrine. She was the god of this place. Back then, the 3 people of the Tao Yuanzun seized Qi from the void and created 100,000 gods. She was one of them. The moment she appeared in the world was the dawn, so she got her name. After she came out, she looked at the stone altar with anticipation. However, she soon revealed a disappointed expression and pouted. She did not like these bloody things, and preferred the plump grains of rice and wheat. However, she knew that the Bai tribe only relied on hunting and gathering for a living. When they were lucky, they could fill their stomachs. When they were unlucky, everyone would starve. It was already not easy for them to take out things to offer to her every day. As if to convince herself, she nodded hard and said, "Yes, she can't dislike it." She sucked hard at the stone altar, and a wave of essence entered her stomach. However, the blood also entered her body. "Tui tui, it tastes terrible. Oh, I can't dislike it, I can't dislike it. I have to eat it." Even though her little face was scrunched up, she still tried her best to dissolve it. Then, the worlds on the offering table turned into a pile of powder, and a gust of wind blew over, carrying everything away. She patted her abdomen, which had not changed at all. Then, she turned into a gust of wind and flew up to survey the land. As the god of this place, her duty was to ensure the survival of this tribe as much as possible. Every day, she needed to drive away the ferocious beasts and monsters that the mortals could not deal with and eliminate poisonous insects and diseases in time. Once she encountered a disaster that even she could not resist, she needed to inform the tribe in time so that they could move and hide in time. After touring the area under her jurisdiction, she clapped her hands in satisfaction. Protecting these people was like a seedling that had yet to fully mature. Watching them grow strong and healthy day by day filled her heart with a sense of satisfaction. At this moment, she suddenly heard a murmur in her ears. Her round ears moved a little, and she knew that someone had come to the shrine to worship. She listened carefully and found out that it was a woman from the tribe making a wish. She said that her child was sick and she hoped that the deity could save her. She bit her finger and thought for a while. Then she looked up and saw that it was almost noon. She flew to the east, and after traveling for 3,000 miles, she saw a green lake. Because the land was vast and the population was sparse, every god ruled over a vast territory. In a place with many settlements, the distance between each god was usually several thousand to 10,000 miles. Because they all had the ability to fly in the sky and burrow into the ground, the distance between them was not too far. It was just that her place was too remote, and she only had one neighbor. The place in front of her was called Shanghu, which had a circumference of 30,000 miles. Therefore, there was a god with considerable mana guarding it. This god was called Shaoxian, and she usually appeared as a woman in white. Just now, she was on the surface of the lake. She saw a beautiful woman with skin as white as porcelain holding a jade flute, walking on the waves. Her long dress was in the water, and her hair and clothes were fluttering in the breeze. In the sky, white birds were flapping their wings and flying, and the reeds by the shore were swaying gently. This scene could be described as poetic and picturesque. Just then, she tiptoed and waved at her from afar. She called out, "Sister Shaoxian, I'm here to borrow some dew to save someone." Shaoxian smiled. With a wave of her hand, she took out a jade bottle. She moved the edge of her mouth slightly down, and a crystal thread slowly flew into it. Then she shook her wrist, and the jade bottle flew over. She saw that the jade bottle was very big, so she held it with both hands and hugged it to her chest. She said happily, "Thank you, Sister Shaoxian." She waved her hand. "I have to save someone, so I'll leave first. I'll come back to see you next time." There was a little reluctance in Xiaoxian's eyes, but she still did not say anything. She only nodded at her lightly. She rode the cloud and flew for more than 10 miles. She looked back and saw Shaoxian standing against the water. She was still looking at her own reflection, and there was a sense of loneliness and weakness. She shook her head. This sister was good in everything. She was gentle and polite, and often helped the weak, but she was a little sentimental. In fact, these gods were born from impurities, and they had the wishes of living beings. So sometimes, their emotions were even stronger than mortals. After she turned back, she followed the feeling of the power of vow and came to where the tribal woman was. She saw the sick child and sprinkled a few drops of dew on him. Seeing that the child fell asleep peacefully and his breathing was stable, she felt relieved and left quietly. When she returned to the shrine, it was already evening. She saw a man with a bamboo stick, wearing animal skin, and carrying a bamboo basket was walking towards her. She knew his identity at first glance. He was a member of the Ji clan. It was said that everyone in this clan was taught by the gods in their dreams. Everyone was enlightened, and they received the god's decree to go to various tribes to teach them how to plant crops, raise livestock, and teach them etiquette. Because they were protected by the Whaley, they could walk freely in the wasteland without fear of the beasts and monsters. The man seemed to notice someone was looking at him. He turned around and his expression relaxed. He stood still and bowed to her. "Greetings, great goddess." She said, "Jishur, are you here to teach people how to farm?" Jishur smiled warmly. "Yes, only by farming can we have surplus. Only by accumulating surplus can we have a strong population and prosper the tribe. Only then will we have the strength to read and understand etiquette, honor, and disgrace." She said, "But it's hard to farm here." As the deity of this place, she knew that other than monsters and monsters, there were natural disasters everywhere. Often, a mountain flood would destroy the land that had been worked on for years. Jishur thought for a while and said, "Not only do I teach people literacy and etiquette, I also teach them how to cut mountains and forge weapons to defend against the beasts and monsters. I also teach them how to build canals and dams, which can be used to increase irrigation and eliminate water pollution. If I succeed, I can ensure the prosperity of the tribe." She said happily, "That's great." But she seemed to have thought of something and her face darkened. Jishur noticed it too and asked curiously, "Great goddess? What's going on?" She said dejectedly, "If you succeed, I won't be needed here anymore." Lady Ji smiled. "You worry too much, exalted deity. Most of the things that wisdom does are within the capabilities of humans. However, if we encounter something that humans cannot handle, such as those calamities and demons, we still need to rely on you." She blinked her eyes and asked, "Really?" Seeing Jishur nod, she became happy again and said, "There are still a few miles from here, let me bring you there." Jishur quickly waved her hand and said, "It's just a few steps, how can I trouble you?" She wanted to say something, but she suddenly heard a rumbling sound coming from outside, and she could not help but be shocked. Her feet stopped moving, and she flew up into the clouds. She saw a few giants that were incomparably large, and half of their heads were buried in the clouds, walking towards her. With a single step, they crossed several tens of kilometers, and the direction they were heading towards was where the tribe was located. Her face instantly turned pale as she recognized them as the Taoists. When these giants slept, they rested their heads on the ridge of the mountain and breathed like thunder. When they woke up, they moved mountains and crossed the sea. They were extremely cruel and ate wherever they went. They would not let any living thing go, so she could not help but feel anxious. Even though she was able to drive away the ferocious beasts, she didn't have the slightest way to fight a giant like this. The latter would be able to arrive here in a few tens of steps at most, so even if she went to Carefree Immortal's place to ask for help now, it would be too late. If she were to migrate the tribe, then she wouldn't be able to go far in a short period of time, and it wouldn't be long before she would be caught up by the giants. That's right. Her eyes brightened as she remembered that Jishur always had many ideas. Perhaps he could have a solution, so she flew down and told him about the giants. When Jishur heard it, his expression turned serious. He thought for a while and asked, "How many people can you bring with you?" She said dejectedly, "I can only bring about 100 people, any more and I won't have the strength." Jishur did not panic and said calmly, "The Taoists can't see, they can only distinguish by smell. You can order the tribe to smear grass juice and mud on their bodies to hide their smell. Then they can migrate to a low-lying area and maybe they can avoid it." She hesitated and asked, "Will it work?" Jishur comforted her, "The small Taoists are like insects in front of the Taoists. As long as the smell is gone, they won't chase after you." She knew that she couldn't hesitate at this moment. The longer they delayed, the smaller their chances of escaping would be. She nodded heavily, but just as she was about to move, a golden red light came whistling down from the sky. It circled around the puppets a few times, and then there was a thunderous roar. After a few breaths, the flesh and blood of the puppets were completely swallowed by the light. Then, the giant skeletons lost their strength and fell to the ground. But the strange thing was, the aftermath didn't spread far, only a large cloud of dust rose. She stared with her eyes wide open. Jishur was also shocked. He had never seen such a scene. Even in the pictures given by the deities, there was no similar scene. After a while, the golden red light suddenly pierced through the thick smoke and shot towards where they were. In the blink of an eye, it was in front of them. Then, it turned into a pale young man in a golden red Taoist robe. He looked at Ying-shi and said carelessly, "Hey, are you a deity here?" Ying-shi saw that he did not look like a good person. Panic showed in her eyes, but she still gathered her courage and stepped forward. She put on an aggressive look and opened her hands to block him. She said with a trembling voice, Who are you? I am the guardian deity here. If you want to swallow the living as long as I am here, don't even think about it." The young man was startled for a moment, then he laughed out loud and said, "Little girl, you're quite interesting. Even though you're just a little god, your courage is not bad." His expression turned serious as he puffed out his chest and said, "Listen up, I'm Zhang Chan, a disciple of the Xianyuan Tianqing Palace's Xianyuan Dao Lord. Today, I came here to find an item." He took out a scroll and unfurled it. "This item, do you too recognize it?" Chapter 1729. This time, Zhang Chan was ordered by Zhang Yan to come to the continent to collect the treasures of heaven and earth. After wandering here for 30 years, he had already gained quite a lot. However, the last few treasures were extremely difficult to find. After asking many gods, he found out that one of them had been seen in the southeast region before, which was why he found this place. The few Bai people were extremely dangerous to living beings. When he saw them from afar, he went up and dealt with them along the way. Now that he thought about it, he no longer needed these living beings' blood and qi to nourish himself. However, he did not mind having a change of taste. Dao Master? Ying-shi's eyes widened. All the gods knew that she was originally a strand of qi activity in the void. Later on, she was created by the 3 Dao Masters. Just now, she appeared in the world. However, the 3 Dao Masters were high up in the sky. Most people had never seen her before. After a while, she came back to her senses. She hurriedly bowed and said, "I, Ying-shi, greet High Ambassador." Zhang Chan was satisfied with her attitude. He shook the painting in his hand and pointed at it. "Have you seen this before?" Ying-shi looked at it seriously for a while and shook her head. "Never." Ji-shi cupped his hands and said, "Immortal Master, may I have a look?" Zhang Chan took a look and said, "Ji-shi? You people do have some tricks up your sleeves. Take a look." He handed the scroll forward. Ji-shi looked at it for a long time and did not miss a single detail. After he was sure, he said, "This is the spring-autumn poo. I had the honor of seeing it when I came here." Zhang Chan's eyes lit up. He asked anxiously, "Where did you see it?" Ji-shi said, "About 100 miles from here." Zhang Chan clapped and laughed. "It's easy to find it. Come, follow me to find it. Don't worry, I won't treat you badly." Ji-shi bowed to him and said, "Hi Immortal, it's late now. I can't recognize it. Why don't I accompany you to find it tomorrow?" Zhang Chan only wanted to complete the task that Zhang Yan had given him as soon as possible, so he waved his hand and said, "This is nothing. Let me cast my transcendence energy and change the day and night will not be difficult." Master Ji smiled bitterly and said, "Esteemed Immortal, I'm just a mortal. After a day of running, I'm already tired. Besides, the spring and autumn Bodhi has hands and feet. It can run all over the mountain and burrow 10,000 feet into the ground. It only comes out during the day to absorb the sun's essence. That's when it's easy to catch." Zhang Chan asked doubtfully, "Is it that hard to find?" Lady Ji said, "Exactly." Zhang Chan saw that he couldn't find him in one go, so he didn't pester him and said, "Fine, I'll come find you tomorrow." Just as he was thinking about where to go to meditate and cultivate, he suddenly saw Ying-shi looking at him eagerly. He turned his eyes away. "Little god, what else do you want?" Ying-shi let out an and her eyes darted around a few times. She was a little flustered, but she calmed herself down and said, "Since you're here, as the host, I should welcome you. I wonder if you don't mind?" When Zhang Chan heard this, he was a little surprised at first. Then he showed a satisfied expression and said, "Little god, you're quite tactful. Fine, I'll go with you today. Shi was instantly happy. She saw how powerful this high immortal was. Even the powerful Jure were no match for him. Moreover, he was the disciple of Xianyuan Dao Lord. If she treated him well, he could just give her some talismans or spells and she would be able to better protect her people. However, she didn't forget about Lady Ji, so she invited the two of them into her own shrine. The shrine did not look big from the outside, but it was a completely different world on the inside. It was obviously carefully decorated. Whether it was the cushions on the tables or the tapestries on the walls, they were all carefully woven with soft grass. As soon as one entered, one could hear the chirping of birds. There were also a few sparrow lamps flying around. There was a thick layer of grass under one's feet. It was thick and comfortable to step on. Not only was it warm in spring, it was also a bit interesting. Lady Ji praised, although this place isn't the immortal abode in the clouds, it's full of vitality and is more approachable. She was a little embarrassed by his praise. She invited the two of them to take a seat and served them a few cups of tea. Then she looked at the two of them nervously. Lady Ji's eyes lit up when she saw the green leaves in the tea. She took a sip and felt her fatigue disappear. There was no longer any hunger in her stomach and her whole body was filled with energy. Zhang Chan took a sip and commented, "It's passable." She heaved a sigh of relief when she heard this. Then she excused herself and ran out hurriedly. She only returned after more than 2 hours. Zhang Chan was puzzled and asked, "Where did you go just now?" She excused herself and said, "Reporting to High Ambassador, just now, the Tao people made too much of a commotion. I was afraid that the people wouldn't understand the reason, so I went to appease them." When Zhang Chan heard this, he praised, "Not bad, not bad." He took out a dragon spout silver pot from his sleeve and said, "I borrowed your place to meditate for a night and tasted your tea. I don't appreciate your kindness. There's nothing else to do here, so I tried to form a blood bond with a treasure. If you don't mind, you can take it. You can use it however you want." As he said this, he tossed the silver pot over. Shi instinctively caught it, but she felt the weight in her hand and almost dropped it. She exclaimed, "So heavy." Zhang Chan said proudly, "This treasure is made from star mining metal. It's a little heavy now, but when you're familiar with forming a blood bond with it, you'll be able to lift it easily." She was very happy to get a treasure. She hugged the pot and bowed, "Thank you for the treasure, High Ambassador." Zhang Chan waved his hand and said, "It's a small matter. This place is not bad. I'll meditate here and cultivate. All of you can leave. Don't disturb me if there's nothing. Lady Ji, I'll go to the spring-autumn Bodhi with you tomorrow." Lady Ji said, "I understand." Shi and Lady Ji stood up and bowed, then left. On the second day, dawn broke. After bidding farewell to Shi, Zhang Chan brought Lady Ji and rode a cloud, heading towards the place where the spring-autumn Bodhi appeared. In the past, when he searched for treasured materials, he would find them wherever he went. He mostly relied on his own senses to sense the signs. This time, with someone's guidance, he found the spring-autumn Bodhi in less than 4 hours. After benefiting from it, he wanted to keep Lady Ji by his side, but Lady Ji was unwilling. She only said that the people were waiting to be enlightened, so she couldn't accompany him. Zhang Chan didn't force her. After this incident, he only now understood that it was better to ask the gods. He might as well ask the indigenous living beings. After successfully sending Lady Ji back to her tribe, he gave her a few elixirs and prepared to leave. At this moment he suddenly felt something and looked up. He chuckled and went to search for the next target. At this moment, among the clouds in the vault of heaven, there was a god in golden armor standing in midair. He was holding a huge bright mirror in his hand and looking at everything. Every movement of the gods, including Shi, could be seen in the mirror. His name was Feng Tong, and he was a patrolling god who had been personally appointed by Fu Qingming. This patrolling god could be divided into 3 positions: patrol, and patrol commissioner. Patrol was responsible for supervising the gods so that they couldn't slack off, and they would record every word and action of this generation. Patrol was to make up for mistakes. Because the gods had to do things, they couldn't just blindly exploit them. They also had their own wishes and requests, so their job was to record them one by one and then try to report them to their superiors for solutions. As for patrol, it was to investigate and recommend. Those who did well would be promoted, and those who did nothing would be demoted. Feng Tong's job was patrol. After he finished reading, he picked up a brush and wrote on something for a long time. Then, he put away the huge mirror and flew away. In a split second, he tore through heaven and earth and arrived in green jade heaven. After opening up this heaven, Fu Qingming erected a main hall, which was called the Green Rainbow Palace. Below it were two other halls, the Golden Pardon Hall and the Tsuyang Hall. The place Feng Tong was heading to this time was the Tsuyang Hall. When he arrived before the hall and reported his arrival, he was called in. Seeing a Taoist sitting there, he went up and bowed. "Greetings, Taoist Master Chang Yang." Fu Qingming was now in charge of the 100,000 gods of Kunshe. Because he needed to deduce his own divine arts and forge his Tao treasures, he only left an incarnation here. He excused himself and asked, "Did you bring the technique manual?" Feng Tong took out a bundle of jade slips and said, "It's all recorded in here." Fu Qingming's gaze landed, and the bundle of jade slips flew up and landed on the table. He said, "This is a 30-year report, and it involves a total of 100,000 gods. You guys mustn't make any mistakes in your report." Feng Tong replied, "Ever since I received the orders, I've been constantly on guard. I can't make any mistakes." Fu Qingming nodded slightly. He glanced at the jade slips and said, "You can leave for now. I'll call you if I have any questions." Feng Tong bowed politely before retreating out of the hall. Fu Qingming flipped through the many records in the jade slips. After a moment of thought, his consciousness returned to his body. Afterwards, he found a disciple of the Green Jade Palace and said, "Go to the Qinghuan Palace and the Qinzhao Palace. Tell them I have something to discuss with the two of them." The disciple left with the order. Not long after, auspicious clouds surged outside the door, and golden light shone everywhere. It was Zhang Yan and Dan Yi. Fu Qingming personally came out to welcome them. After greeting them, he led them into the palace. After some small talk, he went into the main topic. "Two Taoists, it has been 30 years since we captured the Qi and created the foreign gods. Under the protection of the 100,000 gods, everything in the territory of the human Tao is peaceful and the tribes are flourishing. However, these foreign gods don't have any hierarchy among each other. Although their actions are commendable, they are still in a state of disunity. It's a pity that they don't control each other. I have the intention to restrain them." Dan Yi agreed. The human Tao needs etiquette and rules, and the same goes for these foreign gods. From the top to the bottom, it's easier to control them. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Fu, you must have a plan." Fu Qingming said, "I do have some plans. In the past few decades, the foreign gods have already formed their own set of rules. There's no need for me to keep an eye on them. It's just that as the territories of the tribes expand, they will need more gods in the future. It's no longer appropriate for me to handle these mundane matters, so I can let it go. Therefore, I want to set up a divine master to replace me in managing the gods, rewarding merits and punishing faults. If there's anything in the future, you can ask him directly and there's no need to care about anything else." Dan Yi nodded and said, "I wonder if you have a candidate in mind." Fu Qingming shook his head and said, "I don't want to choose from those foreign gods. After all, this generation is formed from the same Qi of the ancestors in the past. Although they bow their heads and obey orders, it's also because they're forced by the Weili. Most of them are not close to me." Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. He had already guessed Fu Qingming's thoughts. Fu Qingming looked at the two of them and continued, "I think that the four of us can work together to create a god, and then let him guide the gods on my behalf." Chapter 1730. When Zhang Yan heard what Fu Qingming said, he pondered for a while. It should be known that the current deities were only created with the remnant Qi of the deceased predecessors, while the four of them still existed in the world. If they were created with their Qi dynamic, not to mention other things, just their supernatural power and mana would definitely be far above the deities, and might even surpass the ordinary true Yang incarnation. And because of this thought, a glimmer of the future related to this Almighty had quietly appeared. Therefore, he looked in the river of time, and saw a figure immersed in the golden light. He continued to follow this line, and the further he went, the more clues there were. As the future unfolded, his vitality was gradually consumed. However, once a living being could live forever in the world, it had infinite possibilities. Even if he watched for millions of years, it would be meaningless. Therefore, he only wanted to see if he could control the deities and protect the people path as he wished. As for whether this Almighty would break away from their control, he was not worried. In fact, the chi dynamic of the four people was transferred to make it convenient to control him in the future. Moreover, true yang cultivators would never create things that were beyond their limits, otherwise, they would not need to fight for the Zhou Huanyuan jade. At this time, the golden light in Dan Yi's eyes was shining, and he looked like he was also observing the future. When it came to the people path, he had to be cautious. After a while, he recovered his senses, nodded and said, "Since fellow Fu has proposed this, I think you have thought about the details clearly, so I will not ask more. However, this matter cannot be ignored by fellow E, we need to invite him here." Although it was said that this matter needed the four of them to work together, it did not mean that it could not be done without one person, but it was to make the Almighty obey any of them, so that if there was an accident in the future, there would be a situation where someone could not give the order. On the other hand, although Michihito Ichido tried not to interfere with the people path, he was after all one of the four mighty figures who opened the heavens. Now that there was a great enemy outside, the four of them had to advance and retreat together. It would be unreasonable not to invite him here for such a big matter. Fu Qingming said seriously, "Of course. That's what I'm thinking too. Furthermore, there are some things that I must discuss with fellow Taoist." He conjured a talisman and waved his sleeves. A golden light shot towards Yu Hentian. A short while later, the sound of a treasure was heard from outside. The light was dazzling. The three of them knew that Michito Ichido had arrived, so they went out together to welcome him. After exchanging greetings, they returned to the main hall and sat down. Michihito Ichido said, "Just now, fellow Taoist Fu's letter has already explained the cause of the matter. Since this matter is beneficial to humanity, I will naturally help." Danny nodded and said, "Just now, fellow Taoist Fu said that there are still some things to do. Now that fellow Taoist E is here, can you explain it clearly?" Fu Qingming said, "Although the people path has become more stable under the protection of the gods, it does not mean that all the dangers and calamities have been resolved. However, it has fallen on the heads of the outer gods. In just 30 years, more than 8,000 gods have died, reducing nearly 10%. If this continues, there will definitely be internal troubles. Although they could go to the void to capture the chi and make up for the losses, the outer gods had their own wisdom and emotions after all. They were not like those stone trees that had no thoughts. Due to innate reasons, their emotions were stronger than those of mortals. If they realized that they were risking their lives to protect humanity, not only would there be no benefits, but they would also easily lose their lives. Some of them would definitely change their minds. Although they did not dare to resist because of the four true yangs, they could still be passive and slack off. In fact, in the past few decades, some sensitive outer gods had already noticed this. Once they encountered something difficult, they would prioritize protecting themselves and let the people behind them drown in the calamity. Although there are patrolling officers who reward merit and punish fault here, it is not entirely satisfactory, because it is extremely difficult to judge clearly what happened here. It is difficult to say whether it was because they really couldn't resist, or if it was because they didn't do it consciously, so they had to set up another law to correct their conduct. Dan E also nodded. This was indeed something that had been overlooked. Even though true Yang Supreme cultivators could make all things beneficial to themselves, it was limited to their own subordinates. It couldn't be used on the Kunshe continent, so it was inevitable that this would happen. He thought for a moment before asking, "Fellow Taoist, may I ask what caused these losses?" Fu Qingming said, "Most of them died in the hands of demons and monsters. Because of the flourishing spiritual opportunity in the Kunshe continent, those indigenous living beings should not be underestimated. Until now, I have not seen any demons or monsters intervening. Michihito Ichito said coldly, this junior only sent 2 disciples here. Compared to me, they are slightly weaker. I'm afraid that before they grow up, they will not dare to expose themselves. But sooner or later, they will make a move. Danny thought again and asked, then how does Fu Qingming intend to solve this matter? Fu Qingming said in a deep voice, we can't always look after this junior, so we should find a way out for him so that he can work with peace of mind. Danny asked again, what does Fu Qingming think should be done? Fu Qingming said, we true yang cultivators live in the sea of vitality, and the extraterrestrial demons live in the unknown outside the sky. These foreign gods should also find something to live in, so that they can die but not die. Even if they are killed, they can be reborn. If this is the case, there is no need to worry about this matter anymore. Zhang Yan could feel that after Fu Qingming said this, there would be some undetectable changes in the future. His eyes flickered slightly. It was no wonder that those cultivators of the emotionless path would do everything possible to ask those of the emotionless path to cut off their emotions. In the eyes of this generation, as long as they did not take the initiative to touch the mysteries of heaven, then there would not be any additional variables. In this way, everything could be limited to a range that they could tolerate. Even if there were any abnormal movements, they could be extinguished in time. They even called this inaction and emotionlessness great Tao and heavenly principles. However, everything was in constant change. There was both an orderly and disorderly side. This was the principle of yin and yang, so how could everyone follow the rules? From his point of view, everything had its ups and downs, prosperity and decline. This was the principle of heaven and earth. If everything remained unchanged, it would be the death of heaven and the destruction of gods, and the path of cultivation would be severed. He agreed with Fu Qingming's words. In the future, the enemies would be outside, not inside. If these gods could be entrusted with something and had something to rely on, then they would truly be willing to do their best. As for what would happen after the external enemies were dealt with, that was something to consider in the future. Michihito Ichito pondered and said, this object of sustenance needs to be paid attention to. This was a matter that involved 100,000 gods, and perhaps there would be more in the future. It was also possible that there would be millions or even tens of millions of gods. If the object of sustenance was not good enough, then the system might collapse in a day. However, if it was too good, it might break away from their control under the influence of external forces. Fu Qingming said, I also have this concern, which is why I invited all of you here to discuss it. Danny thought for a long time and said, this matter needs to be discussed at length. Fu Qingming nodded. He also didn't think that this matter would be solved in one go. Moreover, although it was a matter of sustenance, there were still some side issues involved in it. For example, the magic power of the gods was innate, and it couldn't be increased through cultivation. When they made a great contribution, he would find a way to bestow a strand of chi activity to help them improve. However, this could only be used for a short period of time. If they wanted to use it for a long time, they still needed to open up a path of ascension. This was the proper path. However, he felt that it would be fine for the next 100 years or so, but he couldn't drag it out for too long. Because at that time, the demons and devils would definitely try to infiltrate and counterattack. He had to straighten out everything before that. Kunsher continent, Dayan plains. Jin Yu stood on a high rock that was polished by the wind and sand. His hair was tied into a bun, and the white robe on his body was spotless. It fluttered along with the wind, and he was sincerely chanting a high-grade scripture. In front of him, there was a boundless desert. This place was already far away from where the tribes of mortals were. The wind and sand were strong, and in the low shrubs, there were occasionally some faintly discernible ruins. Before the great calamity of the Kunsher continent, the human path had also flourished for a time, so it wasn't strange to see such things here. After a long time, the sun moved above his head, and he finished chanting a scripture. Then he walked down a gentle slope. He didn't rely on divine arts to escape, but just walked barefoot on the scorching land that was covered with gravel. However, with every step he took, he could cross an extremely far distance, as if he could shrink the ground into inches. Along the way, piles of white bones could be seen from time to time. There were living people, beasts, and devils, and it seemed that they were all killed by weapons when they were alive. It could be seen that other than the power of nature, the living beings here weren't harmonious with each other. After walking for half a month, he saw a large river in front of him. He walked along the river, and after a few days, an oasis appeared in front of him. There was a small city built from a stone mountain, and it had a population of about 10,000. However, the owner of this city wasn't a living person, but a strange race called Xinjiao. The rest of the people looked similar, but their eyes were square, their arms were slightly longer than a human's, and their foreheads were fuller. He looked at them a few times. These strange races were the purpose of his trip. In the past, Dai Gong strongly opposed to the conversion of strange races as disciples, but the situation was different now. Bai Wei believed that in the situation where the human path was winning, the disciples could be accepted regardless of their origins. Except for Bu Su Tian, even if there were living beings in the void's primordial sea who were willing to submit, they could be accepted as well. There was no need to adhere to this rule. In fact, this also meant that after the battle between the two primordial demons and the human path's Yuan Zun, their cultivation had also improved. At this time, the guards on the high platform also noticed Jin Yuan's arrival, pointing at him from afar and yelling a few times. Then, a dozen or so pack horses rushed out, bringing with them billowing smoke and dust, circling around him a few times. Jin Yuan also stood still, his expression very calm. These Xinjiao were usually very fierce, and often robbed and killed foreign races, but they could also see that he wasn't simple. They didn't dare to act rashly, and only had a vigilant expression. One of them was tall and strong, and he seemed to be the leader, and he rode his horse forward. He looked down and asked, "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" Jin Yuan bowed and said, "I'm Jin Yuan, a Taoist cultivator, and I'm here to preach and enlighten all living beings." The leader was puzzled, and he said, "A Taoist cultivator?" An old man rode over and whispered a few words in his ear. The leader's eyes lit up, and he said, "You're a god priest?" Jin Yuan shook his head. The leader swung his horse whip twice. "What abilities do you have?" Jin Yuan was silent for a moment, and then he said, "I can summon wind, rain, and thunder, and raise dust and clouds for 10,000 miles." When he finished, there was a rumble in the sky, and black clouds rolled over. A vast storm was about to fall on this barren desert. Chapter 1731. Zhang Yan, Dan Yi, and the other two discussed for a long time and decided to create a master of God first to control the gods. As for the use of sustenance, they could put it aside and find a solution after this matter was over. The four of them activated their mana and leaped out of the sky. A myriad of worlds appeared above them, and their backs reflected the vast void. At that moment, everything seemed to have faded away. To create such a god, the first chi dynamic was extremely important. It involved the form of its existence in the world, and even more so, it determined its original form. Fu Qing was the person in charge this time and also had the body of a Taoist god. Similarly, he needed sustenance to exist in the world, so he was the one to make the first move. His expression turned solemn, and green chi was released from his body. Above it, there was even a layer of brilliant golden light that shone like the rays of the sun. He pointed his finger downwards, and in an instant, a ray of chi light fell and gathered at one point. It looked like it was moving and still at the same time, like a fetus. Danny said, "The yin and yang below are formed, so I will be the one to do it." With a thought, he also transferred a ray of chi dynamic over. The membrane fetus seemed to sink slightly and then bulged outwards, just like the shrinking of a human's heart. After this went on for a period of time, Michihito Ichido said, "The work is not done yet, and the young chi is not strong yet. I will lend you a hand." As he spoke, his chi flowed down like rain. With the nourishment of the chi of vitality, it was like a sprout breaking out of the soil. The membrane fetus instantly turned from weak to strong. One could already see a figure inside, hugging his knees as if he was in deep sleep. Fu Qingming said, "The next step is to manifest into the world. Not only does it need to maintain its original form, it also needs to fight against the heaven and earth. It cannot be done by those with strong qi of heaven and earth. Fellow Taoist Zhang, it's time for you to take action." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. With a move of his mind, surging profound qi appeared out of thin air. Streams of qi revolved in the air and wrapped around the figure before slowly seeping into the membrane embryo. The figure trembled slightly, and then the hands and feet began to stretch slightly. As more and more qi flowed in from the outside, his movements became bigger and bigger. Suddenly, he actually stood up, his hands supporting the wall and exerting force outwards. However, this layer of clothes was extremely tough. He couldn't move it no matter how many times he tried. At this moment, Zhang Yan withdrew his hand. At this point, he had already done what he had to do. The rest was up to him. If he didn't succeed, he would just have to create something else. Dan Yi and the others were also watching quietly. In the evolution of the heavenly secrets, success and failure were mixed here. Even if they exerted a bit more force, it would only add a few more variables. It couldn't guarantee success, so they didn't interfere too much. After a long time, as if the universe was torn apart, the membrane embryo broke and a golden light bloomed. A handsome man stepped out of the light. He looked dignified and dignified. He was wrapped in a golden robe and had a feather crown on his head. He held a seal on one hand and a sword in the other. There were intertwining profound patterns on his clothes. On top of his head, there was a faint purple jiqi cloud hanging down. His body was bathed in it, and he had a dignified bearing. As soon as he descended into the world, he already knew where he came from. After pondering for a moment, he put away the sword seal in his hand. Under the gazes of the four people, he came up and bowed respectfully, saying, "This little god greets the four Tao masters." Zhang Yan turned to look at him. The aura inside this person's body was grand and stable. Even an ordinary true Yang incarnation might not be able to defeat him. He lived up to the efforts of the four of them. However, with this power, even without the help of any treasures, it was enough to suppress the gods. As he wasn't born of impurities, his emotions weren't as strong as ordinary foreign gods. He could be said to be calm and wise, very much in line with their requirements. Fu Qingming looked at him for a moment before saying slowly, "Since you've entered the world, you should have a surname." The handsome man bowed and said, "Please tell me, Tao Master." Fu Qingming pondered for a moment and said, "Now that we're reviving the human path, you should use this as the foundation to protect the human path. Today, I'll give you the name Zhao Heng. What do you think?" Zhao Heng immediately bowed and thanked him, saying, "Thank you for the name, Tao Master." At this moment, Danny said, "From today onwards, you'll be the divine master and help me shepherd the 100,000 foreign gods. As long as you protect the human path, everything else will be up to you." Zhao Heng bowed deeply and said, "I'll respectfully accept the decree." Fu Qingming turned around and saw that Zhang Yan and Michihito Ichido had nothing to say, so he waved his sleeve at them. Zhao Heng bowed again and turned into a golden light that landed in the Kunshi continent. The divine master had been obtained, and there was still the matter of entrustment that had to be resolved. However, this matter could not be decided in a short period of time. The four of them discussed for a while and felt that there were not enough treasures now, so they could discuss it later. Thus, they bade farewell and left. When they left the palace, Fu Qingming called out to Zhang Yan outside and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, I see that you seem to have something to say just now." Zhang Yan said with a smile, "It's just a little shallow. I don't seem to be able to use it now, so I didn't say it." Fu Qingming was interested and said, "Fellow Taoist, can you explain?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "About the matter of entrustment, I think that there's no need to ask for just one thing." Fu Qingming made an "oh" sound and seemed to have thought of something. He bowed and said, "May I ask what fellow Taoist Zhang thinks about it?" Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and boundless stars appeared in front of him. He said, "How about using the celestial phenomena and constellations as one of the entrustment?" Fu Qingming's heart moved and he said, Only seek the spirit and not the form? Zhang Yan said with a smile, That's true. Fu Qingming couldn't help but nod and said, It's indeed a way. He understood the meaning behind this. If the gods entrusted themselves to these celestial phenomena, it was also a choice. This seemed to be an easy foundation to be destroyed by others, but it was actually not. In the eyes of powerful beings like them, regardless of whether it was stars or dust, they were all worlds of different sizes at the end of the day. On the other hand, gods and low-level cultivators couldn't see these things. All they could see was the pure stars in the sky. And what mortals understood was the apex star. As for where it came from, where it went, and what it looked like, they didn't know. In the impression of this generation, it was different from the sun and the moon, but it generally existed forever. If the celestial stars in a mortal's mind were used as sustenance, then as long as the celestial images in the mortal's consciousness were not destroyed, then the gods would not be defeated. This was somewhat similar to the Tao God that he had cultivated. He thought deeply for a long time and said, Fellow Taoist just now said that this is one of the entrustment. In other words, is there a need to entrust other things at the same time? Zhang Yan said, That's right. My external enemies are not only demons, but more importantly, the extraterrestrial demon. Previously when I observed this person, he seemed to have the ability to invade people's hearts. If we know that the gods are only using this as a foundation, then this person doesn't need to annihilate all mortals. He only needs to shake people's hearts to greatly weaken the power of the gods, so we can't completely rely on this. Fu Qingming said, Then we still need to refine another treasure for entrustment. Zhang Yan smiled and said, With this, it will be convenient for us to restrain this person. Moreover, we don't need to overestimate the minds of mortals too much. If some people with intentions cultivate, they might be able to use this point to restrain and even make use of the gods. This is not what I want. Fu Qingming nodded. However, he also approved of the previous suggestion, because it was equivalent to deepening the connection between the mortals and the gods. If the mortals no longer existed, then the gods would also permanently lose a portion of their magic power. As long as it was for this reason, even if they did not use external forces to encourage them, they would spontaneously protect humanity. This was much more brilliant than blindly forcing them. After discussing for a while, the two parted ways. Zhang Yan rode the magic carriage back to Xianyuan Heaven. He knew that Zhang Chan had returned, so he instructed the formation spirit in the hall, Summon Zhang Chan to see me. Then he sat down on the magic seat. The formation spirit left to pass on the order. Not long after, Zhang Chan entered the hall and bowed, saying, Greetings, Master. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Since you're back, is it done? Zhang Chan said, Yes. Zhang Yan said, I thought it would take you hundreds of years to complete it. I didn't expect you to come back faster than expected. Zhang Chan said, Master, I was ordered to go to the Kunshe continent. My search was quite smooth, but there were only a few treasured herbs that I couldn't find. Fortunately, I was lucky and met someone who could guide me, so I was able to find them so quickly. Zhang Yan only needed to glance at the river of time to understand the cause and effect of the matter. He nodded and said, You did well this time. Since you've given me a transcendent artifact, I'll return one to you. He focused his gaze, and in an instant, a pair of membranous wings appeared out of thin air. They were sparkling and translucent, and they were thin like cicada wings. Even though no one was controlling them, they flew about within the hall in an extremely agile and lively manner. As soon as Zhang Chan saw this treasure, he felt that he was very congenial with it. He tried to summon it, and with a spin of the thin wing, it fell into his arms. He channeled his transcendence energy into it and knew that this treasure was very powerful. As long as they were in the same world, with just a thought, he could go to a place he had been before. He was very happy and said, Thank you, old master, for your generous gift. At this moment, he seemed to think of something and raised his head to say, Master, when I passed by Daling Mountain this time, I encountered a strange thing. I went around in a mountain and couldn't get out no matter what. Later, I didn't know how I got out, but it seemed like there was a natural formation there. When Zhang Yan heard this, his eyes flashed. Just now, he was obviously looking around, but he didn't see this experience. He said, "Really?" Zhang Chan said with certainty, "I don't dare to lie to you." Zhang Yan pondered for a while. For such a situation to occur, it meant that the level of that item was at least close to his. Just now, it was not below his senses. He guessed that this item might be another primordial cardinal treasure. This was not impossible. Since the beginning of the Qianyuan era, after every era, there would be a change in the heavens, and a primordial cardinal treasure would appear. The Taiyi golden pearl appeared in the Qianqi era. As for the first primordial cardinal treasure, no one could see it and no one knew where it was. In the past, no cultivators could find it, and they suspected that it had already obtained a great creation. He tried to look down, but he didn't see any traces. If this item was hiding, it would not be easy to find it. However, it might not have been fully formed, or else Zhang Chan wouldn't have noticed it so easily. Since that was the case, he didn't force it. To find such an item required fate. When it was time to come out, it would naturally come out. Now that he had gathered all the precious materials, he could start to create a treasure that he could use. It should be known that after 18,000 huiyuan, the 3 Qian fixed rule virtue would be exhausted, and fate would no longer be on the side of humanity. In other words, if he wanted to obtain the upper state, then this was the best opportunity in this era. If he missed it, he didn't know when he would have to wait. Moreover, the longer he stayed in the world, the more tribulations he would encounter. This was also inevitable. He had a hunch that it wouldn't be long before there would be a battle between humans, demons, and demons. This was also what they needed, because only with such a matter as a catalyst could it be possible for Zhou Huanyuan Jade to come into the world. Chapter 1732. Zhang Yan asked Zhang Chan a few more questions, and then dismissed him. Then he entered a meditative state and refined the yin-yang pure seal, truth-linking steel, and other treasures. After all, these weren't things he was used to, and even if he refined them to an extremely proficient level, they still couldn't defeat the Taiyi golden bead. Moreover, he still had a secret method to kill, so he didn't pay much attention to it. It was just a daily routine. When he was done, he took out the treasures left behind by Zhang Chan and examined them one by one, and then picked out some of the best quality. Finally, he placed the elephant dragon golden furnace in the hall, and prepared to refine this Tao treasure. He had thought about this treasure a long time ago, so his mind was clear. As soon as he got it, he didn't think too much about it and directly threw the treasures into the furnace. Then he started the fire. Not long after, he was on the right path. However, he didn't know how many years it would take to successfully refine it. This kind of treasure was extraordinary, and it could be foreseen that the amount of effort and external objects put into it would be far greater than before. Even the elephant dragon golden furnace could only refine one at a time, so if Dan Yi and the others didn't want to wait for a long time, they could only rely on themselves to nourish it. 100 days passed, and seeing that the furnace fire had stabilized and there wouldn't be any changes in a short period of time, he didn't have to look after it all the time, so he left a magic power incarnation here to guard it and returned to the hall to meditate. Ever since he had established the supreme mystery scripture, the ball of 5-colored light within his divine decree had become more and more resplendent. If he continued to cultivate it, its might would naturally become stronger and stronger. In the end, it would be similar to the Xiantian demon's cultivation of the fundamental scripture, where a strand of it would possess the power to threaten his peers. However, his 5 elements true light could destroy external objects and suppress treasures, and if he really visualized it to a high level, he would also have such a method. It could be said to be both offensive and defensive, and there were no shortcomings. If he continued to cultivate it, he might even be able to cultivate it to a level that could even resist Tao treasures. Mystical Space Realm, Jilan Peak. At the peak of the snow-capped mountain, there was a magnificent altar made of white stone. At the highest point of the glazed shrine, there was a golden pearl enshrined, and there seemed to be a figure sitting cross-legged in it. This person was none other than Taoist priest Dawi. If he was not controlled by someone, then he would have to consume his own strength to go out. Therefore, he usually hid in his treasured body and slept to accumulate Weili. However, at a time like this, he wouldn't reveal any aura or magic power, so in the eyes of others, it was just a rather dazzling golden bead. Below the altar, there was a palace. In total, there were more than 100 attendants stationed here. All of them were handpicked by Bai Wei and Lu Li. Every day, they would light incense and bright lamps, clean the jade stairs of the altar, and drive away birds and beasts, all so that the tiny golden bead would not be disturbed. However, at this time, the tiny golden bead seemed to be startled by something, and the figure inside suddenly opened his eyes. Then, there was a flash of light from the bead, and in an instant, it turned into a golden-robed Taoist, standing in the hall. At this moment, his expression was slightly serious as he looked towards Bu Shutin. He could feel that something in the unseen world seemed to be connected to him, but he couldn't tell whether it was good or bad. He pondered for a while and said, "Could it be that a treasure from this era has appeared?" There were very few things in the world that were connected to him by karma. Moreover, after the great upheaval, the cultivators of the human Tao who sealed him all those years ago had either died or gone missing. Now that he was able to escape, it could be said that karma had been established long ago. Thus, the only possibility was that another primordial treasure had appeared in the world. His eyes flickered and he thought to himself, "Looks like I need to find it first. I can't let it grow like this." He was like this because, logically speaking, as long as this treasure matured, it would be able to compete with him. If he could kill it before it matured, then nothing could threaten him. On the surface, both were supreme treasures of the world, and they were naturally close to each other. However, he didn't think so, and he didn't think that he could make the other submit. Moreover, if the treasure was obedient now, it could change its mind in the future and join the enemy side. Then, his advantage would be gone, and this would be a great hindrance to his grand plan. He snorted. He had one connate cardinal treasure, and that was enough. However, he couldn't let the demons or human path cultivators know about this, or else they would interfere. Thus, he needed to be more secretive. He couldn't search for it himself, or else most true young cultivators would sense it, and he could only find someone else to do it for him. Looks like I need to find someone outside to work for me. Although he didn't have any disciples, he could use the Whaley art to search through the myriad worlds in the universe. If he wanted to move freely in Busha heaven, his cultivation couldn't be too low, or else he would just be sending himself to his death. However, there was also a problem here. Most of these people had their own sections. He was not like the extraterrestrial demon. Although he could display boundless might in battle, he did not have the ability to change people's hearts. Thus, he could only find lower-level disciples and think of a way to raise their cultivation. However, after looking through, he didn't find anyone he liked. After thinking about it, he decisively gave up on this plan. In reality, the myriad worlds were boundless, and as long as he was willing to put in the effort, he would eventually find a suitable target. However, he couldn't wait any longer, and even if he succeeded, this person would need some time to adapt to his increased strength, and he might not be able to defeat his peers. However, if he didn't do this, then there was only one choice left, and that was to use his own aura to create a living being. The benefits of doing this were that this person's interests were aligned with his, and they definitely wouldn't betray him. However, there were also many disadvantages. The power he had accumulated during this period of time would likely be consumed. If it was a true young cultivator, it would definitely not be like this. However, he was just a magic treasure, and without a master, he could only rely on his own power to unleash 10 to 20% of it. Not to mention that he had to pay 10 or even 100 times the price of a cultivator to do this. However, this was the safest choice, so he only needed to think about it for a moment before making a decision. He immediately focused his mind and light appeared in the hall. As the light grew brighter, the entire hall seemed to be bathed in sunlight. Fortunately, in order to prevent the light from the golden bead from attracting creatures with intelligence, this place had already been isolated by a restriction. Even the servants under the spell altar didn't notice anything unusual. About a day later, a young cultivator about 17 or 18 years old appeared in the hall. He bowed to the hall and said, "Greetings, master." Taoist priest Daoi noticed that the young man's eyebrows were slightly dull, and it seemed that he didn't have enough intelligence. He wasn't very satisfied, but there was nothing he could do about it. He wasn't a cultivator, and being able to do this was already a relatively good result. As long as this person could do what he had asked him to do, everything else wasn't important. He asked, "Do you know what you need to do?" The young cultivator replied, "Master needs to search for the whereabouts of the treasure." Taoist priest Dawi said, "If you find traces of this treasure, you don't have to act on your own. Even if it hasn't grown up yet and is still weak, it's not something you can subdue. Instead, it will alarm others. You need to report to me in time. Do you understand?" The young cultivator said, "I'll remember it." Taoist priest Dawi said, "Do you have anything else to ask? If not, you may leave." The young cultivator replied respectfully, "My lord, I have seen from my memories that the place is still under the jurisdiction of the human Tao. It is inevitable that we will run into them. How should we address ourselves at that time?" Taoist priest Dawi pondered for a moment and said, "That's not difficult. After the calamity in the Kunshur continent, although many sects of the human path collapsed and their orthodoxies were severed, there are still many old sites left behind. I remember a few of them. You can go to one of them and borrow their name." His thoughts changed. This creature that he had created knew how to consider these things. It seemed like it was not as inflexible as he had thought. It seemed like it had some value. Thinking of this, his expression softened a little, and he said, "I might as well give you another name. You will be called Junwuchi." As he spoke, he poured a wisp of his consciousness into his mind. Remember these places. They might be useful in the future. Junwuchi went through these memories in his mind and said, "This lowly one will remember it." Seeing that Taoist priest Dawi didn't have anything else to say, Junwuchi didn't say anything else. He bowed and quietly left the place, flying toward Bushutian. On the other side, after Zhao Heng left the void, he came to Bushutian and stood on a bulging hill. He took out the square seal that he carried with him, and it emitted a shining golden light. He summoned the 3 patrollers and said, "In the past, when you encountered any problems, you would directly report to Bai Luo Heaven. Now that I am the Divine Master, there is no need to do so. You only need to report to me." The 3 patrollers had been taken care of by Fu Qingming before, so they all expressed their willingness to follow his orders. But now, although they had become Zhao Heng's subordinates, they were not too afraid of him, because he did not have the power to punish them. If they did make a mistake, they would have to report it to Fu Qingming first before they could take action. And if Zhao Heng deviated from his original intention, they could still report it to the higher-ups. In other words, they were master and subordinate to each other, and at the same time, they had a relationship of supervision. Seeing how the 3 of them did not object, Zhao Heng said, "Now, we need to do 3 things. The first is to set up an altar to worship the 4 Taoist venerables." Setting up an altar would show that he had the support of the 4 Taoist venerables, as well as to show that he was in a position of righteousness. The 3 patrollers naturally did not object to this. They all strongly agreed with it. Zhao Heng continued, "As for the second matter, Venerable Chang Yang has already read through the list of rewards and punishments that the 3 of you submitted a few days ago. He has a rough idea, and the merit is now in my hands. Please invite the deities over so that I can personally report on their merits." The patrollers stood forward and asked sternly, "Divine Lord, if you summon the gods, what will happen to the various tribes? Who will watch over them?" Zhao Heng said slowly, "Don't worry, patrollers. I will personally use great power to protect the various tribes in the territory until the gods return to their own territories." The 3 of them shivered inside. He was clearly confident since he could say something like that. In other words, his abilities were far greater than what they had imagined him to be. They could not help but reveal some reverence in their eyes. They looked at one another again, and one of them took the initiative to ask, "May I ask what the 3rd matter is?" Zhao Heng looked at them, raised his voice, and said, "Among the gods, there used to be no hierarchy, no hierarchy. Now that I am the god monarch, I will announce the rules and regulations, confer titles, and establish a system." Chapter 1733. Jun Wuchi relied on the Weili given by the Tai golden bead to avoid the detection of the People's Path Yuanzun and successfully entered the Kunshe continent. He first went to the old site of the People's Path sect and spent a few days sorting out the lost books here. Then, he cultivated carefully until his chi dynamic changed into something similar to the records of the cultivation method. Only then did he feel at ease. Although this could not fundamentally change himself, as long as he did not encounter the People's Path Yuanzun, he was not afraid of being exposed. After that, he operated his magic power. Relying on the chi activity that Taoist priest Daoi had left in his body, he followed the origin of the trace of karma. In an instant, he appeared at the Great Ling Mountain. After he arrived here, he'd walked around the surroundings and searched carefully. However, he didn't notice anything unusual even after half a day had passed. It was even to the extent that he couldn't find even a trace of the treasure. Obviously, even if the natural spirit treasure had once resided here, it had left a long time ago. He could not help but ponder, where did the treasure go? With the previous trace of karma, as long as the treasure did not disappear, he would always be able to sense it. But at this moment he could not sense it at all, which made him a little puzzled. After pondering for a long time, he suddenly had a flash of inspiration, and he raised his head. Perhaps it wasn't that he'd vanished, but that he'd snuck into a place with numerous living beings. There was too much karma involved in this, and it had instead disturbed the circulation of the workings of the heavens. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that this speculation was true. As the saying goes, a small hermit hides in the wild, a big hermit hides in the city. If the treasure hid in such a place, it would be even more difficult to find. He operated his mana, and golden light appeared in his eyes. He looked out and instantly saw the surrounding tens of thousands of miles. There was only one living being tribe that was relatively large. Although the treasure could have gone to a faraway place, this settlement was so close. Even if it did not hide there, it might have been there before. Just as he was about to go forward to explore, he suddenly noticed a shrine there and frowned. When he came, he knew that the People's Path Yuanzun used many foreign gods to protect the mortals. But he did not expect that there would be gods in such a remote place. But when he looked again, he found that it did not seem to be among them. But even so, there was still a Weili above the tribe. He felt that if he did something bad, he would fall. In order to prevent any accidents, he thought for a moment, and then his figure flashed, turning into an older ascetic monk. He wore a straw raincoat and straw shoes, wore a bamboo hat, and held a withered wooden staff in his hand. He walked toward the tribe. Along the way there was yellow soil and dust, but when he arrived in front of the tribe, he found that the road was extremely flat. Flowers and fruits were deliberately planted on both sides. Even though there were only a few thousand people in this tribe, there was a rammed earth wall outside. It seemed to be newly built. He could not help but show a hint of surprise on his face. Of course, these things were nothing to him, but he knew how he should react after seeing these things to prevent others from seeing through him. Perhaps seeing that he was not an alien, the gatekeeper only asked a few questions out of curiosity and asked for a red fruit tied to a wooden staff before letting him in. After entering the city gate, he saw a thatched pavilion after a few steps. There was a polished tree stump inside. He thought for a while and walked in to rest like the people who were on a long journey. At this moment he saw someone pointing at him. Then, a child came over with a bowl of tea and handed it to him. He said, "Elder, please enjoy." Jun Wuchi saw that he was so polite and was surprised. He took the tea and thanked him. The child bowed to him and turned to leave. At this moment, an old man with a walking stick walked over and said, "Guest, where are you from?" Jun Wuchi saw that the old man's clothes were clean and tidy and he was in good spirits. He stood up and replied, "I am from Qingyuan." The old man did not know where Qingyuan was, but the barbarian land was huge and there were many places he had not heard of. He admired Jun Wuchi for daring to travel alone in the barbarian land without the protection of divine power. He tried to find out what the latter had seen and heard along the way. Jun Wuchi was afraid that he would let the cat out of the bag. After a few words, he changed the topic and said, "How should I address you, old friend?" The old man said, "My name is Rong, and I am the chief here." Jun Wuchi thought about it and knew that the chief was the oldest and most prestigious person in the tribe. He immediately cupped his hands and said, "So you are the chief here, please forgive me." The old man said, "I don't dare, I don't dare." After exchanging a few more pleasantries, Jun Wuchi continued, "I've traveled through many territories and even stayed among the tribes of the unusual species. But I haven't seen many who are as polite and sensible as the little boy from your tribe." The old man stroked his beard and said, "That is because a sage came to the tribe in the Middle Age. That's why this child learned to be polite." Sage? Jun Wuchi's heart skipped a beat. He pretended to ask casually, "Where did this sage come from?" The old man smiled and said, "I believe you have heard of this person before. He is a member of the Ji clan." Jun Wuchi calculated in his heart and knew where these people came from. After all, although the Ji clan was blessed by the heavens, they were still mortals and could not hide from him. His eyes flashed and he said, "When I was traveling in the barbarian land, I wonder if I had the luck to see him?" The old man pointed and said, "Do you see the towering tree behind us? Go along this road, turn east, and you will see the roots and branches of this tree. Go along this road for another half a li, and you will see that sage." After Jun Wuchi expressed his gratitude, he did not forget to finish the water in the bowl and carefully placed it on the tree stump. After that, he walked in the direction that the poem had pointed to. Indeed, he saw a root sticking out of the ground under the crown Ming tree. Because it was so huge, walking on it was like climbing a mountain. He climbed up and not too far away, he saw a wide platform. There was also a big banyan tree here, and under the dense foliage, there were more than 100 children holding bamboo sticks, seriously drawing characters on the sand table on the table. A middle-aged man was walking back and forth, giving pointers from time to time, and straightening the handrails. Jun Wuchi took a look and said, "I think this person is the Ji clan that the chief mentioned." He quietly looked at the person a few times and realized that the latter was just a mortal. There was nothing special about him. After some thought, he rubbed his feet and purposely made some noise. When Ji clan heard the noise, he turned around and saw that it was an unfamiliar old man. He gave a few instructions to the children and came over to greet him. He said, "Elder, do you have any advice?" "Not at all, not at all." Jun Wuchi secretly looked at his eyes and laughed. He cupped his hands and said, "I heard that Ji clan is teaching people to read and understand etiquette, so I came to take a look. I hope I did not disturb you." Ji clan quickly stepped aside and said, "I dare not accept the courtesy of an elder." She then said, "Elder, you don't seem to be from the tribe?" Jun Wuchi said, "Yes, I was originally from Qingyue. After I obtained an incomplete scroll, I unintentionally stumbled upon the door of cultivation. After some success, I thought about the dangers in the wilderness and how difficult it is for the people of our tribe to survive. So, I decided to spread my teachings everywhere and happened to pass by this place today." When Lady Ji heard this, she felt deep veneration. She cupped her hands and said, "So you're a cultivator. I've been disrespectful. I've heard that in the past, the human path was once extremely prosperous. However, it encountered a calamity and declined. If you can fulfill Elder's wish, it would be a blessing for our human path." Jun Wuchi nodded and said, "That is also my wish." Ji clan was even more impressed. He said, "Elder, since you are here, is there anyone in the tribe that you like?" Jun Wuchi stroked his beard and said, "An adult's bones and meridians are already developed and their temperament is set. They are not suitable for cultivation. But these children are smart and there may be someone suitable. But it needs to be looked at carefully and cannot be rushed." Master Ji thought for a moment and said, "If that's the case, why didn't Elder stay? I still have some influence in the tribe, so I will definitely provide enough food and clothing for you. Moreover, the land here is very close to the people, so I believe she will be happy to have Elder here." Jun Wuchi thought for a while and said, "That is fine. I have been traveling in the wilderness for a long time. It is a good time to rest here." When Ji clan heard him agree, he was very happy. Although the Ji tribe was in the wilderness, with his help, they were slowly showing signs of prosperity. It was just that they were still very fragile because they lacked the ability to protect themselves. If they could obtain the cultivation method, they would be able to go further to hunt and cultivate. He said, "Elder, please take a seat. I will go to the tribe to discuss this matter with the tribe elder." He apologized and first settled the children down. Then, he cupped his hands and walked up to the top of the log. Jun Wuchi looked behind Ji Clan. He could not help but squint his eyes. Although he did not see anything wrong with this person, he felt that he seemed to have overlooked something. After thinking about it, if the primordial treasure had intentionally concealed itself, he might not have been able to recognize it. Since the other party invited him to stay here, he might as well stay and take his time to investigate. At this moment, thousands of miles away, Ingshi was riding a colorful cloud and rushing back. She left this time because she was summoned by the Jade Talisman to pay her respects to the Lord God, Zhaoheng. However, the latter also knew that although he had the protection of his own divine power, the gods could not leave their territory for too long. Therefore, he only used half a day to arrange the matters and conferred titles to those who had contributed in the past few decades. Ingshi, on the other hand, received the priesthood of Guardian of the Imperial Household. Although it was only a lower 9th rank, it was still a rank. Among the 100,000 gods, only about 3,000 people received this title. Most of the others only received some miscellaneous titles. With the advancement of her godly position, her mana had also greatly improved. If there were more Ji people in the future, although she would not be able to handle them, she would not be helpless anymore. However, when she was about to reach the crown tree, she saw a ray of light emerging from the Ji tribe. She could not help but be stunned. She rubbed her eyes and realized that there was no longer a strange phenomenon like just now. She felt very strange and urged the cloud to speed up. Soon, she reached the top of the tribe and circled around it a few times. She did not find anything strange. Coincidentally, she saw Ji Zheng walking towards the direction of the earth wall. His footsteps were hurried as if he had something to do. Her eyes brightened and she landed on the cloud. She patted his shoulder. "Ji Shi, where are you going?" Chapter 1734. Madame Ji was stunned. She turned around and bowed respectfully. "Greetings, exalted goddess." Ingshi asked, "Where are you going?" Ji Shi said, "Just now, there was a Taoist cultivator who passed by this place. He has a secret technique, so I thought that I could make him stay and teach the tribe's disciples some defensive techniques. Hence, I went to look for him and convinced him to stay." Ingshi was confused. "Are there still Taoist cultivators today?" Madame Ji replied, "Of course there are. The wilderness is full of spiritual vigor. It's not surprising that some people know some basic Taoist techniques." Ingshi said, "I see." She suddenly tilted her head to look at Madame Ji. The latter smiled. "What are you looking at, exalted goddess?" Ingshi thought for a while and shook her head. She felt that Madame Ji seemed to be different from before, but she couldn't say anything. Madame Ji coughed and said, "If there's nothing else, exalted goddess, I shall take my leave." Ingshi replied, "Sure." She was very concerned about her people. When an outsider came, she looked over and quickly found Jun Wuchi. She looked at him curiously, but no matter how she looked at him, he looked very ordinary. She pursed her lips and thought for a while. Suddenly, her eyes brightened and she took out the treasure pot that Zhang Chan gave her. This treasure was very strange. She realized that as long as she threw something suitable into it, it would turn into another small item the next day. It was usually very useful. She remembered that she had obtained a way-asking stone previously. She only needed to throw it at someone, and if the person was hostile, they would be alerted immediately. Jun Wuchi was sitting under the shade of a tree. At this moment, he felt something in his heart. He didn't know that someone was spying on him. He knew that this was the return of the deity. He felt something land on him, but his expression was normal and he didn't show any signs of abnormality. After Ingshi threw the way-asking stone, she didn't see any signs of abnormality on this person. She felt that there was nothing wrong, so she clapped her hands and left with a peace of mind. Jun Wuqi glanced at the direction in which the cloud had left, and then looked around. He could feel that this tribe had karmic ties with the primordial cardinal treasure, so he might have to stay here for a period of time. After Yingxi returned to her shrine, she didn't enter. Instead, she circled around the perfume pouch and took out a big seal. This time, when she was appointed as the guardian of the imperial household, she was bestowed with this item. However, compared to this, she valued the sachet more. This sachet contained a universe within it, and anything could be stored in it. If she was willing to use her mana, she could even store a small mountain in it. Especially since its appearance was unusually gorgeous, it could be considered the most eye-catching item on her. She held the big seal with both hands and chanted a spell. A rainbow light flew out and shone on the shrine. In an instant, the stone shrine, which was originally the height of a person, slowly changed. First, a platform slowly rose from the surface of the ground. Not long after, it turned into a dignified temple with flying eaves and pointed corners. Outside the temple, there were even 2 mighty stone watchtowers with dragon beasts clinging to them. Upon closer inspection, they seemed to be living creatures. Their eyes were half open and half closed, and their bodies rose and fell with their breaths. Yingxi knew that it was a success. She took a few deep breaths before keeping the big seal. The newly erected temple occupied a space that was 100 times larger than the original shrine. According to Zhao Heng, the gods needed to be dignified, so that the people would respect and fear them. At the same time, they also needed to be able to deter and fight against the demons. A strong and sturdy temple could also allow the people to enter without hiding when necessary. Yingxi listened to the second half of the sentence. Although she was very satisfied with the original shrine, she needed a place to rely on. Then, she would not be so passive when monsters like the Byron appeared. In fact, according to her position, she was already one of the 3,000 main deities. Below her, there should be 3 subordinates, namely, main assistant, guard, and Saifu. In addition, there should be 6 offices in the territory under her jurisdiction. Each office should have at least 6 court officials and 300 divine soldiers. In total, there should be nearly 2,000 deities. This could be considered a complete team of guardians. Unfortunately, there were not many deities now. Each office needed to be guarded by someone. They wished that they could take care of several offices. Naturally, no one would come to serve her. Not to mention her, even the highest 7th grade deity who was conferred this time did not have any subordinates. Zhao Heng was also aware of this situation. Therefore, he gave everyone a lot of blank identification cards and let them be promoted and recruited. Those who were quick-witted would immediately realize that this was actually a disguised seal. Even if some people did not realize it at the time, they would slowly come to realize it later. After this incident, unknowingly, more than half of the deities could not help but lean towards Zhao Heng. Even those who were originally leaning towards the 3 patrollers also had a change of heart. This had nothing to do with their standpoint. It was purely a result of benefits. Yingxi landed and strolled around. Looking at the empty temple, she was a little worried. Zhao Heng stipulated that within half a year, there must be at least 1 subordinate by the side of the main deity. At that time, there would naturally be day patrollers coming to check. Now that she did not have anyone by her side, she could only think of a way to find a few. She had already thought it through. Among the 3 priesthood, 1 would be reserved for the Ji family. After 100 years, she would confer a godly position to him. As for the other 2, she could only find the foreign races and make do with them for the time being. Therefore, she retreated from the temple, rode a colorful cloud, and rushed in the direction of the Shang Lake. Not long after, she saw the figure of the carefree immortal from afar. The latter stood alone on the lake. He had already changed into a set of clothes. At this moment, he was wearing a deep robe with big sleeves and a red cape with a high bun. Each of them was holding a finely woven fish basket. From time to time, a vague group of souls would jump into the basket. There were no mortals in the Shang Lake, and they were not responsible for fighting against demons and monsters. However, their responsibilities were equally important. As early as when the 100,000 deities entered the human realm, the The three patrollers realized that if they wanted to maintain this vast territory by themselves, they would certainly not have enough manpower. Therefore, they set their sights on the foreign race's divine souls. The responsibility of the carefree immortal here was to try to find the foreign race's divine souls above the lake in the wilderness and put them into the essence bottle. In the future, they could be refined into divine soldiers. Today, in the wilderness territory, there were about 12 deities like her. However, she seemed to be valued by Zhaoheng more. She was the only deity who was conferred as the 8th grade love collector. She approached and said, "Sister Carefree Immortal, I'm here today to ask you for a few foreign souls." The Carefree Immortal nodded slightly. She pushed the fish basket and took out an essence bottle. She sent it over with her mana and said softly, "Here are 300 Inbai's soul essences." Inbai was a half-whale and half-human heterogeneous creature living in the Shang Lake. It had a gentle temperament and great strength. Its soul was also very solid. Even if it was not collected, it would turn into some kind of evil ghost and harm the surrounding creatures. Therefore, it was like killing two birds with one stone for her to collect it. She said in distress, "It's a little too much." She couldn't care so many deities. It would be fine if there were only 2 or 3, but it was a headache to think of 300. The carefree immortal didn't take it back. She just looked at her calmly and silently. She couldn't stand her gaze. She became timid and accepted it obediently. This time, she was not in a hurry to go back. She chatted with the carefree immortal for a whole night before saying goodbye. When she came out of the water, she found a golden talisman floating on the shore of the lake. It was given by Zhaoheng and was said to have the ability to repel evil spirits and demons. She couldn't help but think of some rumors she heard before. It was said that the reason why Zhaoheng took care of the carefree immortal was that he liked the latter's appearance and character. She didn't know whether the rumor was true or not, but she didn't want it to be true. In the drumming tribe, apart from the Ji tribe who could see her, other people couldn't communicate with her. If the carefree immortal left, she wouldn't even have a companion. Moreover, she felt that this sister would be even more unhappy than now if she became the carefree immortal. It didn't take long for her to return to the back of the Guardian Temple. At this moment, it was dawn. She was surprised to find that the open space in front of the temple was already full of people. In the past, when this place was just a shrine, it could be said that there were very few incense offerings. If there was nothing important, the people of the tribe would not come here. Elders and the like were even rarer. Usually, they would send their own disciples to come here. But now that this grand shrine was built, all the people of the tribe came to pay their respects, and all of them were in awe and fear. She only heard prayers coming into her ears, but she found that most of them were praying for the deities not to punish them for their past insincerity. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When it was almost noon, the people of the tribe left. There were a lot of offerings, including cattle and horses, as well as her favorite fruits. As for grains, she didn't see them because the Ji tribe only started to reclaim the land just now after the arrival of the tribe. It was not the harvest time yet. She took a deep breath and absorbed all the offerings into her dharmakaya. Only a pile of dust was left on the table. After cleaning up the place, she closed the door of the temple and took out the bottle with 300 soul essences. She removed the stopper and a cloud of obscure chi came out. She widened her eyes and shone her divine seal. She saw that as long as the light landed on those soul essences, they would immediately turn into divine soldiers in black armor and light helmets. In just a few breaths, all of them appeared and bowed in unison. At the same time they said, "Greetings to show you." She was very excited. She nodded and patted the nearest divine soldier. "You are the Guardian Temple." The divine soldier's expression immediately turned serious. His stiff face became more lively and a divine seal appeared on his body. He put his hands together and bowed, saying in a deep voice, "Your subordinate obeys the order." At the same time, she felt that some of the mana in her body was shaved off and transferred to the divine seal. Right now, her divine path was not complete. Refining the soul essences like this could only be temporarily borrowed from the Lord. Fortunately, Ordinary divine soldiers didn't need much mana. After she was bestowed a deity position, her power had greatly increased. She could take it back in the future if she gave it away now, so she didn't need to be too stingy. Just as she was thinking about what she should send these subordinates to do, there seemed to be some movement outside. Looking out, she was shocked to see a fiery meteor coming from the north, streaking across the sky and crashing down in the south. In an instant, the heaven and earth shook. Almost at the same time, somewhere in Buxa heaven, Bai Wei's expression froze and he came out of his meditative state. He divined for a moment and his expression turned serious. The calendar changes and the heavenly Tao continues. This is a sign that a connate spirit of our generation has appeared. He looked in a certain direction with a burning gaze. We cannot go to the Tao domain. We absolutely cannot let the cultivators of the human Tao subdue us. It looks like we have to find a way to bring it here. Chapter 1735. Qinghuan Palace, Xianyuan Heaven. Although Zhang Yan was in the midst of cultivation, the changes in Busu Heaven immediately triggered his senses. He opened his eyes and glanced at the world. He immediately knew what was going on. The calendar was changing and the heavenly Tao was rotating. Not only was the human Tao about to be revived, but Zhou Huanyuan Jade would also appear in the world. Even the innate spirit would be born. He pondered for a while. The innate demon would not ignore this matter. After all, he regarded every innate spirit as his own and would definitely find a way to find it. On the surface, if the innate demon managed to obtain it, it would undoubtedly add another powerful helper. If Zhou Huanyuan Jade fell into his hands, it was very likely that another true Yang demon would be created. Just as he was thinking, he suddenly felt a divine will calling out to him. He knew that the others had also felt it. So, with a thought, he instantly escaped into an unknown place. Following his arrival, the other three Yuan Zun all appeared together. After the four of them greeted each other, Danny said, "The innate spirit has entered the world. My fellow Taoists must have also noticed it. How do you think we should deal with this matter?" Fu Qingming said, "The innate spirit is also a living creature. It has no evil intentions and there is no need to take its life. We can take it in and train it well. In the future, it may be able to protect that human Tao." Michito Ichido said, "With the example of the innate demon, I'm afraid it will be difficult to subdue it." Fu Qingming said, "Before those innate demons joined the human Tao, they had already cultivated for a long time and their Tao heart was already set. Just now, this innate spirit has entered the world. It is like a blank piece of paper. With careful teaching, it may be able to do this." Michito Ichido shook his head. He thought that it was best to destroy it. In this way, they would be able to get rid of this trouble. Although he did not say it explicitly, everyone knew what he meant. In fact, this could also be a solution. Danny thought for a moment, then turned around and asked, "What does fellow Taoist Zhang say?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "In the early years, the demons have been hiding under our human path, but they did not make any moves until the Great Change. Just now, they have revealed their intentions. However, if our human path continues to be this strong, would they really dare to do such a thing?" The three of them nodded. Indeed, if the 7 Tao treasures were in the hands of the human Tao, and the 12 grand celestials were all guarded by the human Tao Yuan Zun, then the Khanate demons would not have the chance to resist. Therefore, in the end, it was not that the demons were too strong, but that the human Tao itself was not strong enough. If they could continue to be strong, they could even avoid the Great Change, then why would they care about these things? Fu Qingming said, "Everyone, the heavens will is hard to predict, people's hearts are fickle, and the cycle of time will change. Today, this innate spirit has entered the world. Tomorrow, there will be demons and monsters appearing. Some of them will definitely escape our calculations. In my opinion, if this item can be subdued, then it will be subdued. If not, then we might as well let it go. If the demons get their hands on the Zhou Huanyuan Jade, then even without this innate spirit, they can still use it to strengthen themselves. If I win, then they will not have the chance. Therefore, the key is not here, but the Zhou Huanyuan Jade." Zhang Yan nodded his head and said, "Now that everyone is involved and the heavens will is stirring, maybe this item will appear soon." Dan Yi also expressed his agreement. However, this didn't mean that they were going to ignore this matter. They could still try to bring it back. He thought for a moment and said, "We can send people to try and find it first. We can also use this opportunity to observe the changes in the surroundings." Michihito Ichido said, "Who should do it?" Danny said, "We only need to send a few disciples." Although the innate spirit was born with Whaley, but just now it had entered the world, it was still weak, so there was no need for them to do it personally. Moreover, according to the agreement, the demons were not allowed to step into the territory of the human Tao, so the chances of this generation succeeding were actually the smallest, so they had to guard against the interference of other forces. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I have a disciple who happened to go look for treasures previously and wandered in the Kunsher continent for more than 30 years. Just now, he returned not long ago. He is more familiar with the matters of this continent than others. There is no harm in sending him this time." Fu Qingming said, "I will instruct the gods later to try to make things convenient for this disciple of yours." Michihito Ichido pondered for a moment and said, "Since the few of you are here, I have something to discuss with you." The three of them looked over. Seeing that he was serious, Dan Yi's expression also became solemn and he said, "Fellow Taoist, please speak." Michihito Ichido said, "Ever since I opened Utian, I have also recruited some disciples. However, after thinking about it recently, although the foreign species on the continent are not human, they are not much different from humans, so they can also be educated. I want to accept this generation into my sect. What do you think, fellow Taoists?" He did this after some consideration. Many foreign species were also intelligent living beings. If they obtained the cultivation method, they would be able to produce many outstanding figures. And if one did not guide and educate them, then they might be roped in by the demons and monsters. Although after being educated, this generation might not necessarily be in harmony with the human Tao, the possibility of them being enemies with the human Tao would also be greatly reduced. Fu Qingming thought for a while and said, "There are many foreign species tribes. If we count their numbers, they are actually above the human Tao, but the races are all different. Many of them are naturally cruel and are similar to demons, but there are also some who are kind and peaceful. I think that we can make use of them, taming the kind and suppressing the evil, so that they can restrain each other. This way, it will not be a great harm." This kind of suggestion was to use the foreign species to suppress the foreign species. The goal was to make them temporarily unable to threaten the people who were still living together. When the human Tao rose in the future, there would naturally be no need to worry about these things. Michihito Ichido said, "Fellow Taoists, don't worry, I have also considered this. Those who are not in harmony with the human Tao will definitely not be accepted into my sect." Danny said, "Since fellow Taoist has thought it through, there is no problem." After the four of them came to an agreement, they went their separate ways. Zhang Yan withdrew from the divine will and called Zhang Chan over. He instructed him to go to the Kunsher continent to find the innate spirit and said, "Just do your best in this matter. Don't worry too much about the success or failure. However, you still need to pay attention to one thing. Now that everyone is in harmony, I suspect that the birth of the Zhou Huanyuan jade is not far away. You can take a look at this matter while you are at it." As he spoke, he stretched out his hand and pointed. In an instant, a talisman was condensed and passed to him. "Carry this talisman with you. If there are any strange signs, you can report to me at any time." Zhang Chan took it and said, "I will remember it." After he left the hall, he only made some slight preparations before he escaped to Busu Tian and headed towards the place where the fire meteor fell. That direction was very easy to recognize because after the heavenly fire fell to the ground, there was still smoke and dust covering the sky. However, he guessed that with such a big movement, the innate spirit might not be in its original place. Not long after, he arrived above that cloud of smoke and dust. With a wave of his sleeves, he dispersed the surrounding smoke and dust. His gaze looked down and he saw that there was a deep pit there. What surprised him was that at this moment, there were about 10,000 people shouting loudly there, and they were continuously transporting damaged star stones out of the pit. It seemed as if they were treating these star stones as some kind of treasure. He didn't think that there would be so many living beings here. However, these people's noses were tall and sharp, and their foreheads were short and narrow. They looked a little strange. In fact, this was not surprising. Ever since the last calamity, the human Tao had collapsed, and many small tribes had been scattered across the barbarian lands. They were far away from the human Tao, and because their ability to protect themselves was limited, they were either captured by the foreign races or became food for the strange demons. Those who were able to survive had mostly chosen to marry with the foreign races, and after several generations, many people were different from their original selves. Zhang Chan had traveled in the barbarian land for many years, and he had seen this kind of situation many times. After a glance, he didn't care much about it. He just looked down at the deep pit and saw that there were still many damaged meteorite fragments. The innate spirit should have been born from some heavenly star. Because it absorbed all the clear qi, it caused the turbid qi to sink and naturally fell to the ground. At this moment, he suddenly saw a huge crystal jade. He could see that there was a dark red object inside. Under the scorching sun, it glowed with a magnificent light. He couldn't help but be moved. Could it be that this innate spirit didn't escape and is still here? He immediately sank down and landed at the bottom of the pit. He circled around the crystal jade a few times and could clearly feel an overflowing vitality. At this moment, he discovered that there were many fragments in the surrounding sand and mud. It seemed that they came from the same body as the crystal jade. He quickly discovered that if all the fragments here were gathered together, they would coincidentally form a crystal jade. He couldn't help but mutter in his heart, could it be that this is the twin spirits? One escaped, and there's still one here? No matter what, since he found this item, there was no harm in bringing it back. He was just about to use his divine ability when a warning sign suddenly appeared in his heart. Raising his head, he saw a mass of gray clouds drifting over from the sky. Suddenly, a thick palm reached out from the void, grabbing at the crystal jade. He snorted and flicked his sleeve. A ray of light flew out and immediately cut off half of the giant palm. The owner of the palm seemed to be in pain and let out a howl, but it seemed to have aroused its ferocity. There was smoke on the palm that swallowed and spat out, and then it completely changed. It was even more solid than before, and it grabbed towards where he was. Zhang Chan revealed a cold smile. He circulated his magic power and with a rumble, a blood-colored fog flew out and went straight into the clouds. There was an incomparably huge bloodline goldworm at the top. It stung the depths of the clouds, and with a miserable howl, the thousands of gray clouds suddenly retreated and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Zhang Chan sneered. It sure ran fast. That thing just now was a type of spirit monster. It was formed from the muddy clouds in the sky by absorbing the essence of the sun and the moon. To these spirit monsters that had attained postnatal cultivation, the innate spirit was undoubtedly a great tonic. Especially when it had just appeared in the world and was in a weak state, it was the perfect time to strike. Zhang Chan did not kill it, because just now, he suddenly thought that these things seemed to be able to sense the aura of the innate spirit, and he might be able to use it to find it. He landed and returned to the deep pit. Although one of the things had escaped, this one was left behind. He thought it would be better to send this back to Shenyuan Heaven first and then find the other one. It was just that the appearance of the innate spirit was too great, and it would inevitably attract more tyrannical creatures. The fate of the nearby tribe would not be good. He muttered to himself, well, since I've seen it, I'll just take it away and find a place to settle it. Thinking of this, he tapped his foot and suddenly a mass of blood-colored chi cloud rose up, enveloping the people of the tribe within a radius of 1,000 miles. Then he leaped up, wrapped them up with the crystal jade, and fled into the distance. Chapter 1736. After leaving the crater, Zhang Chan saw a place with a decent landscape. He put all the creatures down, turned around, and flew towards Shenyuan Heaven. But what he didn't know was that not long after he left, the tribe's creatures kept kowtowing to him. Not long after, they erected a statue of a god, which looked somewhat similar to the golden beetle Dharma power he had. He wrapped the crystal jade in it and broke through the heavenly pass. He returned to the Qinghuan Palace and reported his arrival. Then he went inside to pay his respects to Zhang Yan. After the ceremony, he took out the crystal jade and reported his journey in detail. After listening, Zhang Yan nodded. Even if he couldn't find the other innate spirit, he had gained something from this trip. He glanced at the crystal jade. This item had yet to be born, and that was because the coexisting spirit had taken up most of its essence energy. However, as long as there was external essence energy to nourish it, it could still be born. Thinking of this, he first ordered Zhang Chan to leave, and then summoned Dan Yi and the others. Not long after, the 4 Dao Yuan venerates gathered once again within the divine will. Zhang Yan explained the situation of the crystal jade to the 3, and finally said, "Fellow Taoists, how do you think we should deal with this innate spirit?" Fu Qingming said, "I thought there would be some twists and turns, but I didn't expect it to be found so quickly." He pondered for a moment. This innate spirit can be trained carefully and kept as a protector of the human path in the future. Michihito Ichido said, "Who's suitable to be under?" Danny said, "Since fellow Taoist Zhang's disciple found it, I'll leave it to you to deal with." Zhang Yan thought for a moment and then accepted. Qinsong School didn't accept demons as disciples, but they could still be used as protectors. Moreover, with this innate spirit here, they might be able to find another one. He looked up and said, "I only have this one matter. Do you have anything else to say?" At this time, Fu Qingming cupped his hands and stood up, saying, "I have 3 matters here. I was going to talk about them later, but since you're all here, I'll talk about them all at once." Danny said, "Fellow Taoist, please speak." Fu Qingming said, "This is the first matter that I discussed with fellow Taoist Zhang previously. We talked about entrusting a part of the external deity to the celestial body. I've also mentioned it to the 2 of you later. I feel that before the treasure of entrustment is refined, we should do this first. I wonder if the 2 of you have thought it through after so long?" Danny said, "So it's this matter." He looked at Zhang Yan and said, "After thinking about fellow Taoist Zhang's plan, I think it's feasible." Michihito Ichido said, "Since you all think it's fine, I have no other opinions." Fu Qingming agreed and said, "This is the second matter. I've previously sent thousands of disciples to the lower realm to search for treasures and materials. Now that I've finally gathered all of them, we can start to sacrificial refine the treasure." Green Jade Palace had been passed down for millions of years and had a deep foundation. There were many cultivators with high cultivation. He also rewarded them with karma points, so they were able to find all the treasures in one go. However, it was also because these treasures were not too rare. Otherwise, it would be useless no matter how many people there were. "Oh, have you found all of them?" Dan Yi's eyes lit up and said, "This matter cannot be delayed for long. Since everything is ready, we can start to sacrificial refine later. Fellow Taoist Fu, please tell us the third matter." Fu Qingming said, "After I returned that day, I thought about the difficulty of replenishing external deities. Even if I obtained treasures from the outside world, the number would be limited for a period of time. Therefore, I thought of a plan that might be able to make up for the shortfall." Danny said, "What do you think?" Fu Qingming said slowly, "In the future, if we can successfully refine this treasure of deposit, we might be able to let those who have no interest in the path of Tao enter the path of divinity and entrust them to this item." As soon as he said that, the expressions of the 3 of them changed slightly. They began to consider the pros and cons. After a cultivator reincarnated, they would forget everything about their previous life. It was as if they had changed into a different person. Although they were still themselves after reincarnation, most people only wanted to live in the present and were unwilling to easily abandon their current self. If they wanted to do this, they would have to obtain the great Tao and jump out of the cycle of the mortal world to truly transcend. Since ancient times, there had been very few people who could reach this level. If they could entrust this treasure, the path of external deities could actually be considered as a choice. At least, they would not have to worry about the problem of lifespan. As long as the item of deposit still existed, they could continue to live. There were pros and cons here. The so-called pros were that as long as the four of them were still around and the treasure of deposit was not lost, they could maintain the safety of these people. However, the disadvantage was that once he placed his hopes on that treasure, the magic power that he had cultivated would naturally fuse together, and it would be difficult for him to improve in the future. He could only be like those gods and make great contributions in order to be promoted. However, if he was punished or demoted, then his magic power might not be able to be used anymore. Also, if something happened to this treasure, then it would be impossible for them to enter the cycle of reincarnation on their own, unless a true yang expert was willing to spend mana to bring them back. But then again, this item was in the hands of the four of them, true Yang Yuanzun. If they still couldn't protect it, then it was fate. Even if one didn't enter this path, they might not be able to escape. Dan Yi pondered for a long time and said, I think this is feasible. I've taken in many disciples now, but there are only a few who have truly obtained great fortune. Since they can't enjoy the great Tao, it's not a bad choice if they're willing to turn to the divine Tao. Taoist Yi, on the other hand, was a little worried. He said, it's just that once this door is opened, if we don't restrict it, after tens of thousands of years, I'm afraid the number of gods will greatly exceed what we see now. Fu Qingming's expression turned serious and said, I have also considered this point. There are a limited number of deity positions, and we can't confer too many. In the future, if the deity position wants to redeem someone, no matter who it is, the four of us will have to draw up a list before they can enter. Michihito Ichido said, in that case, it is feasible. Fu Qingming looked at the three of them and said, if you have any objections, then it is decided. The three of them nodded in agreement. Once the matter was settled, the four of them retreated from the divine will and came out of their respective cultivation palaces. They gathered in the void and circulated their magic power, transferring the essence of 100,000 deities and placing a part of it on Busu's cosmic constellation. This was not a difficult task, and it was done in just a few days. Next, they started to refine the treasure. Although they couldn't use the elephant dragon golden cauldron now, with the four of them working together, their mana was the carrier, so there was no need for it. When the four of them began to act, the effects on that sliver of the future were extremely wide. In an instant, it caused some changes in the weather. Even Bai Wei and Lu Li, who were also in Busu Tian, sensed it. Lu Li felt his qi stagnate, as if something was suppressing him. He said in a deep voice, it must be the Yuan Zun of the human Tao who is planning something big. If he succeeds, it will be detrimental to me. Even though the human Tao and them had temporarily stopped fighting and were no longer in direct conflict, the battle in the dark was still going on. What's more, they were at a disadvantage at the moment, so they didn't dare to be careless. Bai Wei tried to calculate, but he could vaguely feel that this was related to the cosmic constellation. After thinking about it, he could only think of one possibility, and he thought to himself, is this person trying to cut off the fortune of the spirits in the world? After all, there was an innate spirit that came into being a few days ago. The power of the sun, moon, and stars was something that many natural spirits needed to rely on. This person had to bathe in it for a long time to transform into a human form. If this was cut off, not to mention that it would be difficult to manifest, but it would definitely weaken the spirits in the world. Thinking of this, he said, I can only calculate that this action is related to the cosmic constellation. This is the doing of the human Tao, and we can't stop it now. We can only let him do what he wants, but we should also take precautions. Lu Li said, what does Guangxing Tianzuan think? Bai Wei said, since this person has the cosmic scripture, then we should start from scratch. We will evolve the cosmic constellation outside of Bususu. In the future, only those who have cultivated our foundation will be able to use it. Lu Li's spirit was lifted and he said, this is a brilliant plan. If this person doesn't join us, then he will only be schemed against by the human Tao. This way, we can take the opportunity to strengthen our sect. Bai Wei shook his head and said, it's just a passive response. When fighting with the human Tao, it will only take a day and a night. It's hard to see success or failure. By the way, has that fellow Taoist found him? Lu Li replied, I can't enter the boundary of the human Tao, so I can only use my divine will to order the spirits to search. It's just that this fellow Taoist seems to be good at hiding his tracks, so he managed to escape several times. Bai Wei thought for a moment and said, these spirits have always been short-sighted, so it's not surprising that they can't find that fellow Taoist. In my opinion, we can leave this matter to Jin Yuan. Lu Li frowned and said hesitantly, he has already come out now? Isn't this too early? Bai Wei waved his hand and said, it's not early. Does Guangxing Tianzuan still remember that in the last era, every time there was a change in the heavenly secrets, the human Dao's Yuanzun would always send cultivators into the world to gain experience? This is most likely to be to find that Zhou Huanyuan jade. This time, the sign of the universe has appeared, so perhaps it's not far from now that the item will appear in the world. Lu Li thought about it and said, if that's the case, then we really can't miss it. Bai Wei merely took out a golden talisman, and a golden talisman appeared out of thin air. He pointed at it gently, and it descended, heading towards the Kunshe land from beyond the sky. On the plains of the Dayan, Jin Yuan's clothes were fluttering in the wind. He was standing on an altar that had just been built, looking towards a certain direction. After his teachings, at present, all the alien races in the desert had become his followers. Be it men or women, old or young, rich or poor, they would recite the basic scripture every day when they walked, sat, or slept. Since the living beings here had been subdued, at this moment, he cast his eyes to the land further south of the desert, which was called Banquet Border. That place was occupied by monsters and beasts. He planned to subdue them and make them his guardians. In the future, when he fought for the Zhou Huanyuan jade, they could also be of great help to him. Just as he was thinking, he suddenly felt a golden talisman floating down and landing in front of him. His expression turned solemn, and he hurriedly tidied up his clothes before respectfully receiving it. After opening it and looking at it, he bowed to the sky and said, this disciple will solemnly obey the order. Chapter 1737. In the blink of an eye, 10 years had passed since Zhang Yan, Dan Yi, and the other two had begun to refine their treasures. At this moment, the embryonic form of the treasures had already begun to take shape. A sparkling and translucent jade floated in the air. Fragments of light scattered outwards, but at the same time, they converged inwards. At every moment, there would be the might of the four of them flowing through it. This first step was actually the most difficult because if the treasure could not support the four people's magic power, then everything would have to start again. If the first time was not successful, then it would be successful in the future. Since the first opportunity was lost, its power would be greatly reduced. Fortunately, this step was successfully passed, and the treasure was successfully stationed in the present world. After another half a year, the four people saw that the treasure did not show any signs of retreat, which meant that everything was on the right path. There was no need to constantly look after it. Therefore, the four of them each left a doppelganger here to continue working, while the main body prepared to return to the place of cultivation. But at this moment, a strange omen appeared in the hearts of the four people. They felt that there was a change in the fate of heaven, so they tried to calculate the future. They only felt that the place was chaotic, obscure, and difficult to understand, but as time passed, it gradually became clear. Zhang Yan's magic power was the greatest among the four. He felt that the matter was not simple, so he did not hesitate to use his vitality to investigate deeper. However, he found that there seemed to be a realm appearing in the depths of the void, but it was blocked by a layer of Weili, so he could not go deeper. At the same time, he felt that the truth would be completely revealed soon. Danny said, "What is it that fellow Taoist wants to see?" Zhang Yan pondered for a moment before he said, "This feeling is slightly similar to the void that fellow Taoist Lu Lin spoke of." Dan Yi seemed to think of something. His expression turned cold, and he hurriedly calculated again. After a while, his eyebrows deeply furrowed. Michihito Ichito asked with concern, "Do you know anything?" Danny shook his head and said with a slightly heavy voice, "I can't be sure at the moment. We will wait here for a while. If it is really like that, we will know in a while." At this moment, somewhere in the void, there seemed to be an object that was originally in a ball, but suddenly, a dazzling brilliance burst out, and then a world bloomed. There were 3 Taoists sitting on each of them. As their auras circulated, their residences were spread out, and the 10,000 realms were spread out. It was as if the realms that had retreated had once again appeared in the void origin sea, and there were countless living beings in each realm. In the middle, a Taoist was holding a horsetail whisk in his hand. His sleeves were loose and his clothes were like clouds. He was sitting on a green lotus, and on top of his head, there were beads of qi rolling and dripping down, showing the wonders of life and death. The Taoist on the left wore a silver robe and stood on 2 dragons. He wore a crown and carried a sword on his back. He stood with his hands behind his back, and there were 2 black and white qi, as if they were fighting. The Taoist on the right sat on a golden whale. He had long hair and his clothes were loose. His left arm was exposed, and there was a strange single-horned snake. There was a vertical mark between his eyebrows, and it opened and closed along with the brilliance, as if it was the turning of day and night. The 3 of them had restrained their qi, and their divine light was obscure. Even though they looked different, there were similarities. Everyone's expression revealed a sense of coldness and indifference. The Taoist in the middle looked at the void and said, "The calendar has changed, and the absolute seal has been broken. We can finally return to the present world. Thou Master Shao, which calendar is this?" The Taoist on the left pinched his fingers, and after a slight calculation he said, "Today is the Qianxin calendar. According to the past, this should be the last calendar of humanity." The Taoist in the middle said again, "Who rules the world?" That Taoist replied, "The sentient Taoists." The Taoist on the right suddenly said, "Someone is calculating my background. This person's mana is profound, and it's hard to hide." The Taoist in the middle said coldly, "Don't bother. Since I've returned to the world, it's hard to hide anymore. Let him be. I want to observe the current situation. If the sentient Taoists are strong, we can take a step back first. If they are weak, we can use Tao techniques to cleanse the purity and restore the order of the world." The Taoist with the surname Shao calculated again, and his eyes suddenly flashed. He said, "My 2 friends, there are only 4 sentient Taoists who rule the world now. They all opened up a big heaven in Busu heaven, but I don't know them. They must be the ones who achieved Tao later." The Taoist in the middle thought for a while and said, "As the calendar rotates, there are bound to be tribulations. I think these are the cultivators who survived after the calamity. I wonder how many Tao techniques they have passed on." The Taoist with the long hair said, "I don't want Busu heaven to decline to this extent." The Taoist in the middle waved his horsetail whisk and said, "Then, it's time for me to sort out the mysteries of heaven." At the same time, as the qi dynamic of the 3 people gradually revealed themselves, Zhang Yan and the rest could feel it more strongly. They could feel that the people who appeared at this moment were of the same generation as them. Michihito Ichido was very surprised and said in disbelief, "Where are these Taoist friends from?" Fu Qingming frowned and said, "They do seem like fellow human cultivators, but their auras." He felt that these people were completely different from them. They all exuded a sense of coldness and indifference, and the great Tao was emotionless. Dan Yi said in a deep voice, "Since the creation of the world, every true young great virtue in the past has a name. They can't be born out of thin air. As long as their qi dynamic exists, it's not difficult to find out their origins." He stretched out his hand and found the records left behind by the cultivators of the human path. After reading it, he couldn't help but sigh and said, "I didn't think that the battle between the sentient path and the heartless path would continue to this day." As he said this, he split the records and sent them to everyone. "My friends, please take a look." Zhang Yan took the jade scroll, and after reading it, he knew the reason for the other party's arrival. The aura came from 3 people, and they were respectively called Deng Zhang, Yin Ping, and Xiao Mu. All of them had attained the Tao in Qianyuan heaven, and they were all mighty experts of their own regions. However, there was one difference between them, and that was that they cultivated the emotionless Tao. The first celestial calendar, which was also the Qianyuan era, happened to be the period when the battle between the sentient path and the heartless path was the most intense. At the end of the First Era, the two sides launched a fierce battle that almost destroyed the heavens and destroyed the myriad worlds. The result of this battle led to the death of most of the powerful cultivators, and the remnant Qi in the void was mostly left behind by that battle. After this disaster, it was the Second Era, which was the Qian-Qi Heaven Era. After that, the great changes occurred, and now it was the Third Era. Although Deng Zhang and the other two had entered Dao as humans, the Heartless Path did not think of themselves as the Yuanzun of the human path. This was because the Heartless Path did not care whether you were a human or a demon or a monster. Everything they did was based on their own interests. Even if you were an extraterrestrial demon, as long as you did not interfere with the fate of heaven and did not hinder their cultivation, they would regard you as one. Even if there were no living beings in the world, they would not have any relations with you. But if you did not follow this Tao, they would definitely kill you. In the final battle back then, the Heartless Path had won, but the three of them had long been prepared. They had created a place of extreme emptiness, and were prepared to retreat into it if something went wrong. Later on, when the battle was indeed unfavorable, they cut off their own karma and escaped into it. If they did not appear again, then no one in the world would know of them, except for their peers who had interacted with them in the past. Even if there were no longer any records of them in the world. But now that they had entered the world, their karma was reborn, and the Jade Scroll would naturally show the records of them. Fu Qingming's expression was solemn as he said, "Our human path has enjoyed the rule of three Qian. Now that it is the last era, it seems that in this era, the karma of the human path in the past will come to an end here." Michihito Ichido frowned and said, "I remember that among the 12 Yuanzun back then, there were two who cultivated the Heartless Path. They were just a little difficult to deal with, but they were far from the stage where they would fight to the death. Can't we just talk it out and have to fight to the death with them?" Dan Yi said in a deep voice, "This is different. The Heartless Path that we saw was defeated. We knew that we could no longer fight against the Heartless Path, so we endured it and did not ask for anything from the outside. These three people achieved success in the First Era, and they are the most difficult to provoke. It is impossible for us to get along well with them. The cultivators who cultivated the Heartless Path were the most radical. They believed that all those who actively touched the heavenly mystery should be killed. Thus, the changes in the heavenly mystery were all within their expectations. Those who were fated would be fated, and those who were not fated would not do anything. However, after that tragic battle, even the Heartless Path cultivators who survived recognized the reality and did not choose to fight to the death. After all, what they did was for their own benefit. Since they could not stop the Heartless Path head-on, they could only adopt the strategy of compromise. But even so, it was not completely stable. The subsequent conflicts of the human path were almost all caused by the disagreement between the two sides. Michihito Ichido frowned and said, "Is there no possibility at all?" It was not that he was afraid to fight. Just now, Bu Shutian had calmed down. Seeing that the human path was about to be restored, the demons and monsters could only play some small tricks. But if they fought with the three of them, it was very likely that the situation that they had painstakingly maintained would be broken. Dan Yi shook his head and said, "If I was stronger, they might be able to endure for a while. But it is different now. We are not much different from them. Who knows, they might turn around and come looking for us." Fu Qingming agreed. Just now, he had seen the records of the past. These three people were the most extreme in their way of doing things. Thus, he concluded that there was no need to think about how to reconcile with them. They would definitely not be on the same path as him. As for Dan Yi saying that they were not much different from each other, he was right. Even though they had more people than the other party, their Taoist treasures had not been refined well. The other party had sealed themselves back then, so they must have some good Taoist treasures on them. Even though he was not afraid, he was still worried. The human path was not without external enemies. If they fought at this time, it would only benefit the demons and monsters. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and he said, "We occupy Bu Shutian and rule this world. Under the rotation of the heavenly secrets, There will naturally be tribulations to disturb us. Whether it is the demons and monsters or the heartless path cultivators, we must face them. If this battle is unavoidable, then there is nothing to fear. We can kill the heartless path cultivators and end the unfinished business of our predecessors. Chapter 1738. After Deng Zhang and the other two established themselves in the modern realm, although they wanted to understand the heavenly secrets, they did not choose to act immediately. This was because they did not know their current opponents well enough. After all, an era had passed, and many things had changed. Therefore, they tried to observe the past. Because many of their peers were involved, they could only see a vague outline and could not learn more details. As they observed, they also sensed Bai Wei and Lu Li's existence, and immediately discovered that they were not human cultivators, but demons. They were rather surprised that a human path cultivator would actually allow a demon to obtain a cultivation method. This was truly rather unbelievable. After all, in the first era, regardless of whether it was the emotionless or the emotionless, all of them were extremely vigilant against natural spirits that were born with divine abilities, and they spared no effort in suppressing them. The Sentient Tao group did this to prevent this generation from eliminating the threat in advance, while the Heartless Tao group simply believed that all living beings that were born with great power should be wiped out to prevent the heavenly secrets from becoming chaotic. Other than that, the three of them also discovered the extraterrestrial demons that came from the edge of the world, as well as the body of Demon Master Zhang Yan, who was guarding the barrier of the world. The current situation was so complicated that it had far exceeded their original expectations. The great power of the three great demon masters originated from themselves. If one were to look closely, they could not be counted as belonging to the path of emotion or the path of emotionlessness. However, these people never cared about the fate of the heavens when they did things. Therefore, in the eyes of the cultivators who cultivated the path of emotionlessness, they were also targets that needed to be eradicated. Deng Zhang said, "Demons have appeared frequently, and human cultivators have declined. I never thought that the world would be in such chaos, and such calamities are all caused by the emotional Taoists recklessly interfering with the heavenly secrets. Now that we have broken the seal and entered the world, we must guide all things back to the right path." Yinping said, "We can send one person to persuade them first. If those four are willing to enter the Heartless Tao, we can avoid a pointless battle." A person that cultivated the emotionless Tao art would absolutely not cultivate the emotionless Tao art. This was because as soon as one entered this path, one would firmly believe that the path one took was the correct path. Moreover, after one cultivated the emotionless Tao art, unless one obtained another fortuitous encounter, it was practically impossible for one to change paths. But if they were willing to cut off their emotions, they could enter the emotionless path. Although the three of them did not think that the current Yuan Zun of the human Tao would be so easily convinced by them, they still had to give it a try. Moreover, through this interaction, they could use it to understand the other party's strength. Yinping said, "Let's try peaceful means before resorting to force. Let me take a look." Xiaomu suggested, "Before Tao Lord Yin leaves, we can send our disciples to various places. Not only will they understand the current situation of the worlds, it will also be convenient for me to spread the Tao in the future." Back then, when they sealed the Void Land, the three of them also severed the karma of their disciples and sealed them inside. When ordinary cultivators were sealed in the void, everything would come to a stop. Even though they had been there for at least 18,000 yuan, it was only an instant for them. In reality, the Heartless Tao was not willing to accept disciples or teach them Tao, because every disciple they accepted would add more karma in the future. But doing so would cause them to be powerless in the future. Back then, when the two sides fought, the Heartless Tao became fewer and fewer, while the emotional Tao was always on top. This was part of the reason. Due to this situation, the Heartless Tao had to change as they were constantly suppressed. However, they had already thought about it from the beginning. All the disciples were just weapons in their hands. Once they had eliminated all the sentient Tao people and achieved their goal, they could abandon all the disciples. At this moment, Deng Zhang channeled his powers. Without giving any instructions, he sent one disciple after another into the infinite worlds. Seeing this, Yin Ping urged the golden whale he was sitting on to go to Bushutian. At the same time, in the mystic space realm, Bai Wei and Lu Li were both fiendish demon Yuan venerates, so it wasn't difficult for them to detect the appearance of almighties in the void. After going through the bamboo slips, they found records of these three people and found out that these people were from the heartless path. Back then, they were no match for the emotional path and had sealed themselves up to hide. Now that the cycle of time had changed and the fate of the world had changed, they were able to come out. Lu Li felt that this might be an opportunity, so he said, "Heavenly Lord Guangxing, what should we do?" Bai Wei thought for a long time and finally said, "We should wait and see. According to the agreement, the two of us only need to deal with the extraterrestrial demons with the human Dao Yuan Zun, but there is no need to care about the heartless Dao." At this point, his voice was slightly heavy. Those who cultivate the heartless Dao view all living beings as enemies. Even if this person can really defeat the human Dao Yuan Zun, he will not let us go. Even though they were innate demons, they were placed under the human Dao. If they were to be differentiated, they would be included in the emotional Dao. Lu Li thought for a while and nodded. If this person can kill the human Dao Yuan Zun, it will be a good thing. But I'm afraid he may not win. He knew the strength of the human Dao Yuan Zun in Bushutian, especially Zhang Yan, who had a secret technique to kill a true yang cultivator in an instant. Even though the heartless Dao had some tricks up their sleeves, and they might even have a Dao weapon, it was hard to say who would win in the end. However, he was hoping that the human Dao Yuan venerates would suffer a setback. That way, they would be able to free themselves from their shackles. Even if the heartless path ended up in Bu Su Tian's hands, they would still be able to seize it back by relying on the Tai golden bead. In the spirit world, the three-headed demon master was also sitting still and watching coldly. They did not have the records of the human Dao, so they did not know about the three's lives, nor did they know about the conflict between the heartless Dao and the emotional Dao. But based on the aura, it was not difficult to tell that the three true yang cultivators were not on the same side as the ones in Bushutian. There was even a hint of hostility between them. They were extraterrestrial demons, and all living beings in the present world were their enemies. But now, they only wanted to perfect their Dao as much as possible, so they thought that if these people did not come looking for them, there was no need for them to jump out. At this moment, Heng Jing saw aura passing through Bushutian's gate and said, "Demon Master Qi Yao, one of them is heading towards Bushutian. It seems that these people are going to deal with the Yuan Zun in Bushutian first." Qi Yao said, "Not necessarily. If only one person is going, it could be for a discussion." Mo Su said faintly, "Demon Master Qi Yao, are you afraid that these people will work together to plot against me first?" Qi Yao said, "It's not impossible. After all, these people are from the same race." Heng Jing was shocked and said, "If that's the case, I'm afraid we are not their match." Qi Yao was silent for a moment and said, "It seems that we still need to ask Demon Master Qi Zhou for help." Heng Jing and Mo Su both agreed. Originally, they were not confident that they could deal with the 6 Yuan Zun in the present world. If there were 3 more, then there was no way they could win. Although they all had immortal bodies and could be reborn from the reverse of heaven and earth even if they were scattered, it did not mean that they did not have any weaknesses. At least, the other party could seal and suppress them. But Zhang Yan was the first demon master in the world. His Dao was profound and he was powerful. If he was willing to work with them or further open the barrier of heaven and earth, then they had a great chance of winning. Yin Ping rode on the golden whale and passed through the Li Heng realm. He came to Bu Su realm and looked around. The scenery here was no different from when he retreated back then. When he looked up again, he saw 4 great heavens. He cupped his hands and said loudly, "Greetings, fellow Taoists. Yin Ping is here to pay a visit." Spiritual light shone above the sky, and a clear and auspicious mist slowly spread out. Golden light sprinkled over the clouds, and 4 Taoists could be seen standing on the rainbow clouds. Behind them, there were millions of heavens. Yin Ping looked carefully. When he saw Michihito Ichito and Fu Qingming, He frowned slightly. But when he saw Dan Yi, he was a little confused. Because the latter gave him a familiar feeling, but he would never forget someone he had met before, let alone someone of this level. He suppressed the confusion in his heart and finally shifted his gaze to Zhang Yan, but his eyes suddenly became a little solemn. He could be sure that the person who was observing the three of them just now was this person in front of him. At that time, he only sensed that the other party's mana was great, but he couldn't know the specifics. But now that he stood in front of him, he felt that the other party's chi was like a bottomless abyss, and it was difficult to measure. Not only that, he could also feel that when facing this person, there was always an inexplicable sense of danger in his heart, as if he could be killed by the other party at any time. He didn't dare to be careless, and he secretly listed Zhang Yan as his greatest enemy. At this moment, Dan Yi took a step forward and returned the greeting. He said, "Since fellow Taoist Yin has come to pay a visit, please come in for a chat." Yin Ping refused, "No need. I only came to say a few words before leaving." When he saw Chen Shi insist, Dan didn't force him and said, "Since it's like this, then please speak, fellow Taoist." Yin Ping looked at the four of them and said, "The workings of the heavens naturally have their own principles. All of us are Weili, so we ought to follow the will of the heavens and not arouse any wild thoughts or stubbornness. Only in this way will we be able to avoid all tribulations and live forever. I wonder if fellow Taoists are willing to sever all emotions and enter my emotionless Tao technique?" Dan Yi never expected that Chen Shi would ask about this right away, and Chen Shi simply left no room for retreat. But he didn't avoid it, and he frowned and said, "What if I don't?" Yin Ping said indifferently, "We attained the Tao in the first era, and now that we've reappeared in the world, I see all the cultivators of the human Tao have been annihilated. This is the reason we've rashly touched the workings of the heavens. This is sufficient to explain that only the emotionless Tao is the supreme principle of the Grand Tao. If all of you insist on not changing your ways, then I'm afraid you'll be unable to escape your doom." Ichito said coldly, "Are you declaring war on us?" Yin Ping didn't say anything, and he only looked at Dan Yi as if he was waiting for the latter's reply. Dan Yi pondered for a moment, then he looked up and said resolutely, "We won't lie to fellow Taoist. It's absolutely impossible for us to switch to the emotionless Tao technique." Yin Ping's expression didn't change at all, and he only bowed and said, "Inaction and emotionlessness are the principles of the Grand Tao and heavenly principles." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a flash of spiritual light, and his figure was connected to the vital energy, and he'd already disappeared. Fu Qingming looked at the sky, and he felt that danger was about to arrive. He said in a low voice, "Looks like we have to prepare for battle." Zhang Yan nodded. But in his opinion, the appearance of these great cultivators of the past was actually a fortuitous encounter. He'd always been searching for the method to enter the upper realm, but it seemed that no one knew about this until now, and he even suspected that such a great cultivator had never existed. Moreover, the other party was a cultivator that had attained the Tao in the first era, so he might know something. After this battle, he would try to find out the truth. Chapter 1739. As the three heartless Taoists could attack at any time, Dan Yi invited Zhang Yan and the other two to come to Cheong Shao Tian to discuss countermeasures. After everyone took their seats, he took out all the ancient books that had been preserved in the past to see if he could find detailed records of the Taoist techniques, mystical powers, and even the Dharma treasures that the three of them used. However, after checking, he realized that there were not many records about the three of them. In fact, the cultivators deliberately avoided them in order to eliminate the influence of the heartless Taoist techniques. However, the three of them were true young mighty figures after all, and they had never really died. Hence, there were still some detailed records, and most of them were fights with others. Looking at all their experiences apart from cultivation, they were almost fighting with their peers. That was not surprising. During the first era, the battle between the heartless and heartless Taoists was the most intense. Almost every thousands of years, there would be a battle between the two of them. The only difference was the size of the battle. The conflict between the two sides had also accumulated until the end of the First Era. Just now, it had completely erupted. After reading the records, Fu Qingming said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoists, I'm afraid these three people are more difficult to deal with than the Khanate demons. Not to mention their combat experience, merely their Tao arts had been tempered to an extremely high level. Moreover, the most important thing to notice was that the three of them had fought on numerous occasions, and they'd lost on numerous occasions. However, it just so happened that they didn't perish every single time, and they were always able to make a comeback. Obviously, they possessed extremely formidable abilities to protect themselves." Michihito Ichido said, "This generation has some skills, but we can't be compared to before." Now, the 7 Taoist artifacts that had been passed down from the human Tao were in their hands. Although they were not well trained, there were still many of them. If they were to use all of them, the power would not be small. Danny said, "What Taoist E said is very true. Busu Tian is our home ground, and there are many restrictive arrays outside. It is enough to fight with this generation." After the 4 of them became the masters of Busu, they did not forget about the threat of demons and evil monsters outside. Therefore, they were always arranging formations, which could also be relied on in battle. Overall, their chances of winning were not small. Zhang Yan did not say anything. In the past, when he fought with others, he tended to attack first. But now, the situation was different. They had Busu Tian, and they had the advantage of time and place. Just like the demons in the past, the longer they dragged things out, the better it was for them. They could just sit and wait for the demons to come. Speaking of which, he had been visualizing the Taishin True Scripture for a long time, but he had never had a real sparring session with someone of the same generation. This time, it was a good opportunity for him to try out his divine ability. On the other side, Demon Lord Qi Yao had left his place of cultivation and was once again at the barrier between the heavens and the earth. However, compared to when he had first returned, the feeling that Zhang Yan gave him was even more unfathomable. He understood in his heart that this was because this Demon Lord's Tao was profound, unlike them who had not yet completed it, which was why he improved so quickly. Not to mention the ability to fight, just in terms of cultivation, he was probably far above the 3 of them. Unless they fully developed their Tao, they would not be able to enjoy such a wonderful result. He collected his thoughts, went forward, and cupped his hands. "Is Demon Lord Qizhou here?" Zhang Yan's body of strength had been refining inexplicably, and his mana was constantly increasing. Because he did not deliberately change it, his body had already become incomparably huge. Now that he heard the call, he immediately moved his consciousness out. In the deep space of the world, a pair of eyes suddenly opened and almost filled the entire space. Then, a loud voice was heard, "Demon Lord Qi Yao, what brings you here?" Qi Yao bowed again and said, "Just now, there is a change in the Qi dynamic in the present world. After our investigation, we found out that there are 3 true Yang Yuanzun who had escaped into the void, and they have broken the seal and returned to the present world. This person looks like a human cultivator, but his Qi dynamic is unique, unlike any other cultivator. We know that Demon Lord Qizhou has entered the present world earlier than me, and he is more knowledgeable. Therefore, we have come to ask, how should we face this person?" When Zhang Yan heard this, he understood that this demon lord could feel that the heartless Taoists were a threat to him, but because he did not know the details of their goal, he could not make up his mind on what to do. He changed his mind. The most ideal thing here was actually to incite these 3 demon masters to look for Deng Zhang and the other 2. However, this person was not without intelligence. They would only do things that were in line with their own interests. They would not be manipulated by him. He deduced that the first target of the heartless Taoists would be Busu Tian, and it would not be long before he would come for them. As long as these demon lords could sit by the side and not do anything, it would be enough. After thinking about it, he said, "This person is the heartless Taoist, and he cultivates the heartless Taoist techniques. As for the Yuanzun in the present world, he cultivates the heartless Taoist techniques." These 2 parties have been at odds for a long time. Qi Yao asked, "Is it sentimental? How is it heartless?" The most intense battle between the heartless Taoists and the sentimental was the First Era. With their mana, they could not see so far into the past. Moreover, there were many powerful beings involved, so it was even more difficult to know the details. As for the Second Era, although the two parties still had conflicts, under the true Yang, they did not have much to do with each other. Zhang Yan understood that as long as Qi Yao and the others were willing to use their energy to investigate, it would not be difficult to find out the truth. Therefore, he did not hide anything and explained the differences briefly. After Qi Yao heard it, he thought for a while and said, "If that is the case, in the eyes of the heartless Taoists, what we have done is also on the list of those who must be eliminated?" Zhang Yan said plainly, "Not necessarily. If the three demon lords do not make a move and do not perfect their Taoist techniques, they will naturally not find trouble with you." Qi Yao nodded and said, "Thank you, Demon Lord Qi Zhou, for clearing my doubts." He bowed and said, "But if those current world Yuan Zun come to my door and want to destroy me, I wonder if Demon Lord Qi Zhou can help?" Zhang Yan did not answer and only said plainly, "Demon Lord Qi Yao, please go back." Qi Yao did not get a clear answer. He paused for a while and did not ask any more. He bowed again and left without a sound. Zhang Yan watched him leave and then looked at Bu Shutian. With his strength here, it was equivalent to a barrier between the two worlds, preventing the unknown beings from entering the current world. Thus, the strength of Qi Yao and the other two would not increase. Therefore, under normal circumstances, he would not act rashly. But if Deng Zhang and the other two were powerful, then he would have to make an exception. Yin Ping left Bu Shutian and instantly returned to where the three of them were. Xiao Mu glanced at him and said, "Looks like the outcome is clear." Yin Ping said firmly, "This person is stubborn and has no intention of changing his mind. All we can do is use our powers and rectify the situation." Deng Zhang asked, "Venerable Yin, how strong are the four of them? Can you tell which lineage they've inherited?" The reason why he asked this was because if they were familiar with the lineage, they would be able to learn a few things from it, so they would be able to deal with it. Yin Ping thought about it and said, "The four of them are all strange. I can't see through the identity and origins of the person who spoke to me. One of them seems to be a treasure spirit, while the other is a god. The person's cultivation path seems to be the legacy of the Changyang lineage. It's just that no matter what technique he uses now, it's nothing special to him. The one I need to pay special attention to is the last person." He paused and said sternly, "This person gives me the most dangerous feeling. I've never seen anyone with such great power before." Deng Zhang and the others became slightly stern when they heard him say that. They all treated this matter with great importance. Xiao Mu asked, "Venerable Yin, do you think the three of yous can take him down if we work together?" Yin Ping said, "I did think about this when I came here. From what I can see, it's extremely difficult." Xiao Mu said, "It's very difficult. In other words, it's not impossible." Yin Ping replied, "There is a chance, but Venerable Xiao, I'll be facing more than just these four people." As a member of the Heartless Tao, they had experienced many battles in the past, and they were mostly fighting against the strong and outnumbered. They were not afraid of being besieged by their Tao techniques and divine abilities, and they even had excellent escape methods. This was the reason why Yin Ping was bold enough to go to Bu Shutian alone. However, that did not mean they had nothing to worry about. Otherwise, they would not have sealed themselves off in the past. Even if they could defeat Dan Yi and the other three, they still had to face the Khanate demon and the extraterrestrial demon. Actually, the best way was to join forces with one of the forces and destroy one of them. Then, things would be much easier to deal with. However, it was not difficult for them to see that the Void Primordial Sea and Bu Shutian could maintain the stability on the surface. It was very likely that there was an agreement between them. Before the agreement was removed, or before a new agreement was made, they would not be able to interfere. Moreover, if they really joined forces, the Heartless Path would be the biggest threat. In that case, it would be better for them to join forces and get rid of the new variables that appeared recently. Then, they could still maintain the original situation. Deng Zhang suddenly asked, "Since Venerable Yin went to Bu Shutian, did you feel the means left behind by Cheng Changzi?" Yin Ping thought for a while and said, I did feel a little bit, but I have not personally seen it. I'm not sure if I can use it. Deng Zhang thought for a while and said, even if it is just a little bit, it should still exist. In that case, we will not change our original plan. Let's see how the four of them react. If they do not move, then we will go to them. Yin Ping and Xiaomu said, that's right. As they spoke, the three suddenly felt something strange. They looked over and saw a golden light penetrating through the void and landing in front of them. A golden-robed Taoist walked out and bowed to them. Greetings, venerable Taoist. The three's expressions did not change. Deng Zhang looked over and frowned. Who are you? The golden-robed Taoist said, I am Tai Yi. Deng Zhang looked at him again and a strange look appeared in his eyes.